All right, good morning once again, fellow speakers, leaders, experts, delegates. Now, if you have not yet gotten your coffee or tea, please do not raise your hand. Okay, it seems that you have gotten your coffee and tea then. Now, that's just an exercise to keep that brain going, all right? Ladies and gentlemen, we had a series of rather insightful sessions for the past 2 days, and welcome to our final day of the National Climate Governance Summit 2024. And I hope that everyone will give their very best to leverage on this opportunity as much as, by giving your full attention to our stupendous lineup of climate heroes. Now, our theme for today is being nature positive and also amidst the 6th mass extinction. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I also hope that you had a rather pleasant and fruitful workshop and also masterclass yesterday. If you have not, then it would be great to give a bit of feedback later on. We'll be showing a bit of a QR code for you to scan and just fill out our online survey form. Now, ladies and gentlemen, to commence our day 3 of the National Climate Governance Summit 2024, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Yang Berbahagia Dato Sri Mustapa Mohamed, former Minister in the Prime Minister's Department's Economic Planning Unit. Let's give him a big hand.
Thank you, Jason. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good morning. Datin Sri Sunita Jayakumar, founder and chairperson of CGM, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the final day, I believe, of this wonderful conference. Thank you, Datin Sri, for inviting me to say a few words. My remarks are short, hopefully sweet as well. I'm no expert in this particular subject matter. Whatever I have upstairs probably belongs to, the previous generation. There are lots of young people here, which is, of course, most commendable. We need to engage more with the younger generation to embed this agenda into our society. Ladies and gentlemen, under the 17 UN SDGs, SDG 13 refers to climate action. Climate change, which many believe is one of the most damning parts of the sustainability challenge, needs urgent action. We can already feel the impact of rising temperatures. Scientists are no longer talking about capping at 1.5 degrees centigrade. It is more like 2 degrees as of now. Global warming is exacting a heavy toll on a number of economies in the world. Extreme weather events have become more commonplace. Due to human activities, the severity and intensity of extreme weather have increased significantly. The latest we hear are the massive forest fires around the world. A recent one in Bolivia consumed about 4 million hectares of forest, resulting in a declaration of an emergency in that country. Typhoon Yagi, which hit Vietnam in recent days, is said to be the worst in decades. Rising sea levels coming from the melting of the Arctic, as well as the Antarctic, is now a subject of a lot of research in many universities throughout the world. Here at home, we have our own share of adverse weather events. Cameron Highlands, for example, is not a school as what it was. Climate change is real, and it has to be taken more seriously. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a consensus that as we enter the halfway mark since the adoption of the SDGs in the year 2015, in terms of progress, we are only at 17% of the target set. This is appalling, to say the least, and the global community will have to intensify efforts to reach at least some of these goals by the year 2030. I'm mindful of the fact that many policymakers and analysts are very pessimistic that Agenda 2030 can be achieved on time. Ladies and gentlemen, when Climate Governance Malaysia was first launched, I think in May 2019, not many understood what is net zero. Many did not fully understand the science behind the climate crisis and why action was needed. Many even questioned why a small open trading economy like Malaysia had to play a role in the global climate ambition. After all, our cumulative emission is estimated at not more than 0.4% of total global emission. Now, of course, sustainability, net zero, planetary health, and of course, climate governance are beginning to be better understood as the phrases are found in the 12 Malaysia Plan, the midterm review, the Madani economy, the National Energy Transition Roadmap, and the new Industrial Master Plan, amongst others. I remember meeting the founders of CGM at the EPU. My team and I were struck by the passion and knowledge of these pioneers. I acknowledge the inputs provided by the founders of CGM, CSOs, some government officials, and a number of regulatory bodies which have been working hard in embedding SDGs and SDGs in the government planning and implementation process. Sustainability, of course, is a journey. We need to strike a balance between long-term and short-term goals. We need to strike a balance between the priorities of many shareholders, of many stakeholders, a balance between development and conservation, and a balance in the allocation of resources, especially time and money. Having said all these, we must bear in mind that the costs of action as well as inaction are increasing rapidly. Ladies and gentlemen, the theme chosen for this segment of the summit is highly relevant. I'm told being nature positive amidst the 6 mass extinction means restoring ecosystems, protecting biodiversity, and ensuring that our development is sustainable and regenerative. It is about shifting from a mindset of exploitation to one of stewardship, where we recognize that our well-being is intricately linked to the health of the planet. I would like to share with you what I believe are the critical initiatives we need to deliver a nature-positive future for the nation. Important to its success is mindset change, a cultural shift, not just among citizens, government officials, CSOs, businesses, big and small, but also leadership at all levels in driving this very important agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure all of us in this auditorium agree of putting conservation of ecosystems and species as a priority. We need to protect existing habitats by establishing more protected areas and ensuring that they are well managed to safeguard biodiversity hotspots. Next, we need to restore degraded ecosystems. Reforestation, wetland restoration, and coral reef rehabilitation can help revive ecosystems that have been damaged by human activities. Thirdly, species reintroduction. Programs are also important. In fact, reintroducing species into their native habitats can help recover populations that are at risk of extinction. Next, we need to embrace sustainable practices in agriculture and industry. These include regenerative agriculture, where practices that restore soil health, reduce chemical use, and increase biodiversity on farms will help reverse land degradation. Reprotection of key biodiversity areas, KBAs, is also important in climate governance. This involves identifying and safeguarding KBAs, which are crucial for the survival of many species and helps maintain vital ecosystems. In this regard, we need to do a better job in preserving forests, wetlands, mangroves, and other key habitats. It is reported that there's been a decline in our local biodiversity expertise over the years. We need to address this issue as well. The integration of indigenous knowledge is another important aspect of climate governance. Indigenous communities often have sustainable practices that are aligned with nature conservation. A number of communities in Sabah and Sarawak, for example, are actively engaged in such practices. Integrating traditional knowledge and empowering these communities in conservation efforts are essential in maintaining biodiversity. Ladies and gentlemen, there's no denying that governments, corporations, and communities must put in place and enforce policies that prioritize nature-positive actions, such as biodiversity-friendly land use planning, incorporating wildlife corridors, green spaces, and ecosystem services into urban planning. Another priority is strengthening public engagement and education. There is no denying that raising awareness about the 6 mass extinction and the importance of biodiversity are key prerequisites in building a more nature-conscious society. Of course, many initiatives have been implemented in recent years, but there is a need for better coordination amongst the various stakeholders. We need to reduce the silo mindset. I would like to add the importance of transparency and sharing of information amongst various stakeholders to enhance the whole of nation approach in achieving the sustainability agenda. And finally, in the forthcoming COP29, there is a need to create national momentum on what we as a nation need to do to support the global agenda. There is a need to obtain a greater buy-in from various stakeholders, especially the men and women on the street, and especially among the younger generation of the urgent need to achieve the SDGs and meeting our ESG aspirations. Thank you, and have a fruitful day. Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Yang Berbahagia Dato Sri. There we go, ladies and gentlemen, talking about biodiversity, and also Dato Sri, we are so appreciative of you to attend our event here today, despite your busy schedule. Thank you for gracing our event here with your presence. And ladies and gentlemen, we shall now continue on with the first keynote for today, for the title Planetary Boundaries at Tipping Points. Now, the speaker for this keynote session is a prominent physicist and a climate scientist who holds multiple influential positions in academia and research. We now present a pre-recorded keynote by Professor Anders Levermann, Head of Research Department at the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research.
Good morning. My name is Anders Levermann. I'm a physics professor at the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research in Germany, and I'm very honored to speak to you today. I will cover the physics of climate change, the physics of planetary boundaries, and especially focus on tippings, which can occur in the climate system, but also in society. Climate change and tipping points. When I was 5 years old, an American glaciologist, John Mercer, published a paper in Nature. Nature is not just any journal, it's not a newspaper, it's one of the highest ranking scientific journals that we have in all of science. And in this publication, he made a number of predictions. He said that if we continue to emit carbon at the same rate as we're doing it right now, which was in 1978, we will have doubled the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere after 50 years. This was a very good approximation. It was just an extrapolation in the future. John Mercer was in glaciologist, so he was studying Antarctica, and he made a number of further predictions. He said that the warming that we will see because of this additional CO2 will start to warm the ocean, and then the Antarctic the ice shelves in the Antarctic Peninsula will disintegrate. They will fall apart. And in 2002, it was the last B ice shelf as being the first ice shelf to ever make it to the front page of the New York Times because it disintegrated over a fortnight. The paper, the core of the paper was actually about a tipping point, because John Mercer said that further warming will then lead to a tipping of Antarctica. And this will lead to sea level rise of up to 5 meters. And in 2014, 3 papers came out that all showed that the Western Arctic ice sheet has now been destabilized in Amundsen Sea sector. I'm telling you this because John Mercer didn't have any satellite data. He didn't have any computer simulations. He just had physics, the basic laws of physics, to make these kind of predictions. And we can use models now. We can use data now in order to check these predictions, and they turn out to be true. We might have destabilized the Western Arctic ice sheet, which you see here on the left. And what happens in the course of the next centuries is that West Antarctica will discharge all its ice into the ocean and elevate sea level by 3.5 meters, a little less than John Mercer said, because he didn't have the full data scale. We cannot relax, because even though West Antarctica might have already been destabilized, and even if we don't do any further warming, might discharge all its ice into the ocean, we have similar situations in East Antarctica, tipping points that have not been reached yet, and but that will be reached under future warming. In fact, in the meantime, we have a full stability analysis of Antarctica, and we know that there's the West Antarctic ice sheet tipping, the East Antarctic ice sheet tipping, and then there are further instabilities, tipping points that will be reached if we increase the temperature of the planet more and more. This is relevant for sea level rise, and sea level has been rising over the last century by about 20 centimeters, which is a problem for the infrastructure that we built on the seaside, but sea level rise is slow, so we will be able to withdraw from the coasts. We will be able to take away what we have built or leave behind what we have built if we respect the sea level rise and don't ignore it, as some parts of some states in the United States are trying to do. Because that is one thing that you can't do. You cannot ignore the sea level rise, because it'll come, because the physics behind sea level rise is rather simple. The ocean water expands when it gets warmer, and ice melts when it gets warmer, and this is why we have sea level rise at the moment, and will continue to have sea level rise for centuries to come. And what is important for me here is, on the one hand, to tell you about sea level rise, but on the other, to emphasize that the physics behind the warming of the Earth is similarly fundamental. It's a bit more complicated, but it is similarly fundamental, and that is why we know that the CO2, methane, and nitrous oxides, if they get more abundant in the atmosphere, will increase the temperature of the planet. We know this from fundamental physics. We don't need climate models. We don't even need observations to know this. We need the quantum physics of Max Planck that tells us about the emission and absorption spectra of the molecules CO2, CH4, and so on. And then we need the fact that a warmer atmosphere can hold more water vapor, which you all know, because that is why the tropics are so moist and the high latitudes are much drier. That's also why your glasses get condensation on them when you come from a warm place into a cold place. These are fundamental physics law, and they tell us that the temperature will go up until when we increase the CO2 concentration of the planet. Now, what's less known, but is what's similarly fundamental, is that this is one of the of the 9 planetary boundaries, of which we have passed already 6. If you look into them more closely, you can see that there are a number of them that are global problems. One of them is climate change, and I want to focus today on climate change because covering all of the tipping points is it's much longer than 20 minutes. The stability of the climate is really a very special case, because the planetary boundary for keeping the atmosphere at a warming level that we can endure, that we can live with as a global society, requires that we go to zero carbon emissions, zero fossil carbon emissions, net zero fossil carbon emissions. And this is illustrated by this figure here. You can see on the right-hand side 3 different emission paths. The CO2 emissions are the additional CO2 that we put into the atmosphere. The small dotted line keeps us below 2 degrees of global warming, below 1.5 degrees of global warming, which you can see in the middle panel where the CO2 concentration is given, and then it's the lower panel which gives you the warming level. And you can see in degrees Celsius we are here with the dashed line below 1.5 degrees. So the dotted line. The dashed line is what you get when you don't do any climate protection till the end of the century and then go to zero carbon emissions quickly. This gives you 5 degrees of global warming in the 21st century. The straight line, the full line here, you obtain when you burn all the oil the gas, and all the coal that we've found so far in the ground. Then you get an enormous CO2 concentration, which is consistent with the time when the dinosaurs were on the planet 100 million years ago. And you also get the temperature that the dinosaurs lived in, and that is 15 degrees of global warming. What I would like to highlight here is that the time scale. You can see this is the year 2000, and this is the year 4000. Independent of whether we have stopped emitting carbon because we've come to our senses and we've realized how dangerous climate change is, or we've stopped emitting carbon because we don't have any coal, oil, or gas anymore, the CO2 concentration stays stays up for centuries to come. And the warming of the Earth will actually decline even slower, because we are pumping currently a lot of heat. 97% of the heat that we are keeping on the planet is going into the ocean. So we're pumping the ocean full of heat, which will then slowly be released over centuries to millennia, even after we have stopped emitting carbon. And this has a consequence, a very strong consequence, and that is that we have to go to zero carbon emissions. Now, this sounds like a radical political statement. It is not. It is a physical statement, and you can circumvent physics. But it's also not such bad news, because it means that we don't have to reduce, which is very difficult for an economy that wants to grow to do. You don't have to reduce, you have to do something different. And we know what we have to do differently, and that is getting from the fossil fuel world into a renewables energy world. The energy is there, and we'll have to do the transition. If we don't, then we'll get on the red emission path. That's the RCP 8.5. We've been on this for a while. Now we've deviated a little bit due to the climate protection laws and regulations all around the planet. We have to get to a blue line or even below that if we want to keep the 1.5 or 2 degrees target, which is the Paris Climate Agreement. If we don't do this, we get the 5 degrees. If we keep the Paris Climate Agreement, we have a chance to stay below 2 degrees. In any case, we'll have to go to zero. Otherwise, we'll see tipping. We'll see tipping in the coral reefs, as you see this already here. This is the death curve of the coral reefs. On the x-axis, you see the temperature increase of the planet. On the y-axis, which percentage of warm water coral reefs are dead, and you see that even if we keep the Paris Climate Agreement, we'll have most of the coral reefs on the planet dedicated to dying, to bleaching. The Arctic sea ice is reduced dramatically. This was the situation in 1979. The gray part is actually lack of data. There was ice there. In 2020, this looks dramatically reduced, and we actually know that the decline is very strong, that we haven't seen this over the last centuries. This is the time series of the last 1,450 years, and we will find a basically ice-free Arctic independent of this scenario within the next 20 years. And that is because the warming of the next 20 years we have already caused by the carbon emissions of the past, which doesn't mean that we're allowed to do nothing. If we don't do anything in the next 20 years, then we will not meet the Paris Climate Agreement. We will pass the 2 degrees, and we will pass a number of tipping points. These tipping points, and you might be wondering why I'm talking about the North Pole here, these tipping points do not necessarily have to be physical tipping points. They can be societal tipping points. They can be societies tipping over into a turmoil situation, abandoning their state of law. And this is the actual danger of climate change, namely the increase of weather extremes. We have to expect more intense and more frequent weather extremes, and the reason for this is different for the different kind of weather extremes, but it is also rooted in fundamental physics. Heat waves are already a problem. You see here the European death toll that we observed from the COVID pandemic compared to the heat wave in 2003. 60,000 additional deaths in Europe in 2003 due to the heat. We had a similar number in recent years, again, from a heat wave. Heat waves we find all around the planet. India had a series of devastating events. We can understand them reasonably well, actually through statistics. If you see here, this is the temperature here, again, as an example from Europe. This is how often a certain temperature occurs, and you see here this is the deviation from the mean. So when there's a zero, this was the most common temperature in Europe in summer in the past. This would be a very cold summer because it's out of the third standard deviation, and this would be a very hot summer, 1 in 100 years kind of event. And look at, observe these very hot summers here, the frequency of very hot summers just from the observed shift of this distribution. The distribution increases here quadratically exponential. It's a Gaussian distribution, which means that the number of extreme heat waves is increasing quadratically exponential during this transition. We have a different reason for different weather extremes. Here we know that from thermodynamics, we know that a warmer atmosphere can hold more water vapor, which means that the number of extreme rainfall events will increase. This is very important, that this is the so-called Clausius-Clapeyron equation. That is the amount of water vapor that you can hold in the atmosphere, because this is the amount that will then discharge into a strong rainfall event. The normal drizzle rain, which might be good for agriculture, which might be good for society in general, is not what we are talking about. We talk about the extreme rainfall events, and they increase with temperature, which we have recently shown to be true, not just in reality, what you see here on the left, the frequency, the strength of extreme rainfall events. We've seen these in observations which follow very nicely the Clausius-Clapeyron equation. Is the dashed line here, the black dashed line. The climate models from all around the world give you the red dashed line, and they're slightly underestimating the strength, but follow the Clausius-Clapeyron equation quite neatly. With respect to the frequency of extreme rainfall events, the observations are again here following Clausius-Clapeyron, or the Clausius-Clapeyron is following the observations as you like it, but the models underestimate the frequency of extreme rainfall events dramatically. In any case, a warmer atmosphere will have more extreme rainfall events, and this will lead to more people at risk of flooding. This is these are percentages from a global analysis. And I cannot go into depth here, but we will see more extreme rainfall events. Then there's a whole set of extreme rainfall events that is mainly hitting the northern hemisphere, but still reaches all the way down to the tropics, and that is related to the jet stream. The jet stream is a wind that goes once around the planet, and as if in the past has started to meander more and more frequently. So it's doing waves, like you can see them here in the red lines, in the red shading. And whenever that happens, extreme events occur. Here's an example of the winter 2017 to 2018, where the jet stream meandered to the south and covered the United States, the north of the United States, in a deep layer of snow, stopped the economic life, stopped actually life altogether between Chicago and New York. We had the same event happening again a year after. We have a number of these now, which are sudden and short-term extreme events that occur: temperature drops, extreme rainfall, extreme snowfall, but even extreme cold that all of a sudden occurs, and extreme heat in other places. There's another phenomena that I want to mention that is related to the jet stream, and that is when the jet stream has 5, 6, or 7 of these indentations when you count them one around the planet. If this occurs, then the jet stream starts to freeze. The wind is still blowing, but the pattern stays the same, and that means weather stays the same. We had this as a very famous example in 2010, where there was a heat wave over Russia that wouldn't go away for 6 weeks, and at the same time, a low-pressure system led to 6 weeks of rain in Pakistan, which led to the biggest flood ever. The biggest freshwater lake on the planet occurred there temporarily. 10 million people had to flee. We had the same in Pakistan a year later. And this was a catastrophe that Pakistan is still suffering from. We find that tropical storms will intensify. We don't know how tropical storms, typhoons, and hurricanes, how they develop, or how we don't know the precise physics. It's very hard to predict how many hurricanes or typhoons you will have in a season. But what we know is we know where they get their energy from. This energy comes from the surface ocean, and thereby increases if you increase the temperature of the planet. This causes, all of these different extreme events cause insurance risks. The big question is, how far will we shift the distributions to the right, and where will the insurances stop to be able to cover the problems, the damages that occur, and when will the countries be overloaded and will not be able to cover the costs that occur. So we know that climate change has economic consequences. We know that the rainfall distribution has economic consequences, not just in the form of destruction, but in the form of sand in the engine of the economy, because it is impacting economic growth. And we find that this economic growth is so big that it is much higher than the costs that we would have as a society globally if we want to transition from fossil fuel world into the fossil-free, carbon-free universe. You can see this here. The political goal of the Paris Climate Agreement is also the economically optimal one, at least for the planet. And the big question is how we can make this happen everywhere, and how can rich countries help to foster this in countries that are more impacted by climate change and haven't caused the climate change they are suffering. Thank you very much for your attention.
There we go. Thank you, Professor Levermann. If you are currently watching our broadcast live, and also to those of you who are still attending virtually. Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin with our first panel discussion for today, I would like to warmly invite Mr. Sharath Martin to deliver a message on behalf of Faizal Parish, Director of Global Environment Center, GEC. His slides will be shown here on screen and be briefly shared by Mr. Martin on Faizal's behalf. But, however, if you would like to watch his full video on his message, you may find it on CGM's YouTube channel. All right? If you have not yet subscribed to CGM's YouTube channel, it's the Climate Governance Malaysia. Just search it up on YouTube. Okay, one moment. I believe, yeah, let's start with the message first. Over to you, Mr. Martin. Okay. But as Sharath Martin is going up on stage, allow me to also introduce our panel discussion for today, the panelists, which will be led by our moderator, Sharath Martin himself. Now, just briefly introducing our moderator here, he has spent the last 3 decades in the realms of finance and accounting, and more recently in sustainability. Currently, he is the Senior Policy and Insights Consultant, Trustee, ACCA for Asia Pacific, WWF Malaysia. Now, allow me to introduce the panel to everyone, starting with a professor who held numerous senior leadership roles in various organizations in both private and government sectors. He is the Pro-Vice-Chancellor for External Engagement at Taylor's University. Please give a big hand to Professor Dr. Ong Kian Ming. And our next panelist is an esteemed ecologist and the Executive Director of the Tropical Rainforest Conservation and Research Center in Malaysia, who is a passionate advocate for the preservation of Malaysia's tropical rainforests and has dedicated his career to developing and implementing conservation strategies for endangered tree species. Please put your hands together for Dr. Dzaeman Dzulkifli. All right, with that, Mr. Martin, the stage is yours.
Right. Very good morning. Selamat pagi, everyone. So today, I know we talked about Faizal's slides, but I thought it's also good to just set a bit of context. And we're going to talk about how the capital market can support nature and the nature-based solutions that we so desperately need to fund. But let me just put a few things out. I am, an accountant, so I'm a geek when it comes to data. So a lot of my context is about numbers. Some of this you already know, because I'm very conscious that I'm speaking to the choir here. As you know, Malaysia is one of the 17 mega-diverse countries, but there are 3 in ASEAN and 5 in Asia-Pacific. Our home is not just Malaysia, our home is much wider than that, and we have to start thinking about that in a much more borderless way. The second, and this seems to have, it's sort of faded into the background, is a study that Bank Negara did. So since I'm in Bank Negara, I should mention and give a shout out to them. They did a study with World Bank where they looked at both the impact and the dependency of nature on commercial loans, the portfolio. And there are about 54% of commercial loans which are highly or very highly dependent on nature, and those that are impacting nature, it is far higher, that's at 87%. There's another piece of work that was done globally. It was commissioned by the UK Treasury, but it was entirely about the global economics of biodiversity. And that was the Das-Gupta review. Unfortunately for Professor Das-Gupta, his report got launched when COVID was in the thick of its throes, and so we hardly had enough time to talk about the economics of biodiversity. Another hat that I wear is in WWF, and WWF has valued freshwater ecosystems at 58 trillion. Against a global GDP of 100 trillion, that's about more than half. It's not on anyone's books, it's not priced anywhere. So let's think about that as we talk about how the capital market can deal with this. The earlier presentation, in fact, throughout yesterday's and the last 2 days, you've no doubt heard about the nexus between climate and nature. So let's keep that at the forefront of our minds. With that, I'm now going to turn to our panelists to begin with some opening thoughts around this whole subject of biodiversity. And maybe along the way, if you could also help the audience to unpack some of the more difficult understandings around ecosystem services. What does that mean? Because we hear technical terms. The earlier presentation was also somewhat technical. How do we break that down? How do we understand what's at stake? Prof, can I just turn to you first?
Sure. Yeah, thanks. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak to such a distinguished crowd, especially those of you who are very technically inclined. Definitely don't know as much as you. I'm coming much more from a policy design perspective rather than an environmental perspective. But I thought that we should have some clarification in terms of the terms that are used for this particular discussion to be able to expand some of these definitions so that we can have a more holistic view of the different parameters that we are discussing. So, for example, I think when we talk about capital markets, I think immediately people talk about the public capital markets, which include the stock exchange and different exchanges that Bursa has set up with those kinds of regulatory oversights. Those are important because those will drive the main activity with regards to listed companies, the big corporates that want to do offsets in terms of buying carbon credits and certificates. But we should also not forget the private capital markets, and we had a discussion on this in our alignment meeting. And there's also, when I talk about private capital markets, these are the markets that will drive innovation from a venture capital, from a startup perspective, to be able to increase the number of companies who are going into the service sector in this service ecosystem, right? We can see that, for example, Singapore is putting a lot of money into this because this is the next sort of like a horizon of job creation that they want to have in the sustainable services ecosystem. So I think it's important to keep in mind there's the public capital market side and also the private capital market side fulfilling different functions. The other thing that I want to talk about is when we talk about supporting ecosystem services, I think it's important that it's not, we should think more about just the services that are focusing on trying to maintain biodiversity, which Dzaeman will talk about and much more knowledgeable about. From my perspective as a former Deputy Minister at MITI, and Topa, the former minister, is here as well, there's also a lot of supporting services that are important in the industrial sector that can contribute to the capital markets with regards to carbon mitigation measures, with regards to decreasing our carbon footprint in the manufacturing and manufacturing-related sector. So I think when we talk about those two things, the capital markets as well as the services, we should have a more expansive view on those two areas.
Just a quick follow-up. When you say there are some ecosystems that support the industry, such as?
Okay, yeah. So, for example, let's talk about factories or industrial parks. Right now, most of the factories in Malaysia, especially the SMEs, they don't measure scope 1. Don't talk about scope 2, scope 3, right? But there are now, people in the service sector, startups, even large corporates with, sustainability arms that are trying to do things like measure, evaluate, and review with regards to, carbon emissions as a starting point. Later on, there will be more, opportunities to be able to measure ESG-related, parameters with regards to large and small companies. So that is the kind of ecosystem we're talking about. And then after you measure, you want to mitigate as well. So there are companies that are coming in, doing solar and energy solutions, energy optimization solutions that are part and parcel of that industrial ecosystem.
Thank you. Dr. Dzaeman?
Too many mics now. So thank you once again to the organizers for inviting me here. So I'm a biologist as a background, as my training. And a lot of times what we see, I'm just going to jump straight into the kind of valuation component of this because, Professor, you already started that conversation. What is happening is now we're always calculating things in silos, right? Services and the products are always looked into one or two single kind of products. So everybody's looking at forest, but just for the carbon. They're not looking for it for the value of water it produces or the other biodiversity that it contains and things like this. And that, I think, will be the biggest problem when it comes to valuation because we're only looking at it from a single point of view. What needs to be done is looking at it from a whole systems perspective, right? And I think that's the most important part. And recognizing that values that those provide. Because if you really think about it, right, if you're going to be developing a restoration project or a carbon sequestration project from just one or two services, you're gonna not care about the other components. So when it comes to ESG components, you can actually tick many boxes by supporting and developing some of these biodiversity protection projects by also including social components such as the hiring and training and upskilling of native communities and stuff. So I think that would be kind of like the major component. The second point I think is also measurements, right? It's very technical components and it's very hard for us to then come down and actually measure some of these things. Technology now is getting a little bit more up to speed, so there's going to be things like eDNAs that you can actually go in and screen an entire forest for what content it has, right? So that is becoming a lot cheaper. It's also becoming a lot more, tech is being spent on this, so satellite imageries are becoming a lot more cheaper. Airborne kind of unmanned flying vehicles becoming a bit more stronger, that they can also have measurements and tools that can do that. So bringing down this and making it in simple terms that more people can understand and implement will make this a lot more better to implement, I would say. Yeah. So we need to support these sort of initiatives, and I think it will come in the next 3 to 5 years, I think. Yeah.
You know, I think that's a really important point because sometimes we are at risk of looking at things in silos, right? And understanding just how one asset, I'm sorry I used that word, but I'm an accountant. This is one asset, which is the forest, brings about so many benefits. And again, speaking like an accountant, unfortunately, we don't value it, we don't price it, and then as we will see, we do more harm to it, right? So
can I also add an example? I know since you're talking about forests, I'd like to bring up something that I'm very passionate about. Some of you may know, which is, and you've alluded to it, water. And where do our water sources come from in Malaysia with regards to drinking water? It's our rivers, right? That is also not priced in properly. We spent 3.8 billion ringgit on the River of Life, for Sungai Klang and Sungai Gombak. But we do not price, for example, how the cleanliness of the river can be used to generate economic and social activity. We do not measure, for example, the amount of pollution that factories put into the rivers that can stop water supply, which has happened, in my constituency before. So I think, if let's say these things can be properly evaluated and priced, that also can be part and parcel of the service ecosystem that we are referring to.
And speaking of that, it's not just your constituency. I think many of us in Klang Valley get disrupted just because someone, somewhere, has polluted a river. So I just want to also remind the audience that we've had a poll question that we've asked, and I can see that more than 100 of y'all have answered. So unfortunately, we can't bring it up, but if you could refer to your app, you will see the poll question and the results. So the question is, what needs to change for the capital market to support nature and its ecosystems? I shouldn't have said that I'm an accountant, because now I have to work out these numbers in percentages terms, but roughly, we are looking at about, say, 75%. Oh, stop answering, please, I can't keep calculating. Yeah, it's about 75% that is calling out for the need to shift the understanding and mindset of investors, right? And we've got a question from the audience online, but we will also take questions from the floor. The second highest is on the need for regulations and standard setting that will then catalyze investments in nature. So that's what you all think. Now I'm going to turn to our panelists to get their thoughts on this issue, after which I'm going to open the floor to any questions that you may have. If not, I've got my backup questions, but look, this is your session as much as it is for the panelists. So have your say, ask the questions that you need to. So firstly, maybe to start with Dr. Dzaeman, what do you think needs to change in the capital market to support forests, to support the kinds of ecosystem services that it so vitally provides?
I think we need to, I think I spoke about it slightly early on, but I think the major component is the valuation, right? We do not see it as a resource. We do not pay for it, for its services that it provides. So right now it's valued as zero, like most of the water that is coming from most of the rivers and stuff, we don't pay for the services that the forest up front, where the water comes from, is providing, right? And so until, like, for example, like when a state like Kedah, for example, is supplying a lot of water to Penang, for example, and the state then needs to gain state revenue from logging, right? In that situation, it then says, okay, how can I then pay for compensation for it? And they're now looking into kind of like ways of which the forest is providing services for Penang, for example. So that's just one example of it. But it can go throughout the whole area. Like, it's very hard to put a value on a single species, right? What is the value of, a single rare plant? What is the value of a population of tigers, for example? It's very hard. But as a whole, yeah, people do try. But as a whole, people can get it quite simple. A single stream will provide X metric tons of clean water. And how much would you pay for a liter in the supermarket? Something like that. And we need to calculate that. Recreational-wise as well. People use forest for whatever now that's trending. Healing and all these kind of things. But where else would you go if that forest wasn't there? You would go to a club, to a sports club, to a shopping mall and everything, and then have to pay a certain amount. So it's that kind of value that you need to calculate. Think about, like, Bukit Kiara, for example. How many hundred people and going to that sort of park to enjoy it for free? So but as I think. Scientists and people calculating this, and governments, state governments and local municipal governments need to calculate that service and that cost into the kind of picture. I think that's very important. And to do it, they need to come up with every single aspect, you know, not only water, flood mitigation as well. So a lot of times forests are now restrained to slopes and hills, and how can that slopes and hills mitigate kind of excess water flow and also landslides, for example. So there's many different things that we can calculate, and it's not done.
Yeah, I mean, and that's just forest. There's also the wetlands, there's also the mangroves, so many things. Prof.
Yeah, so two things. I think on the first part, whatever policies or regulations that we put in place for better protection, for better pricing, it needs to have more public discussion, oversight, and transparent disclosure of proper information. And I'll give you a very specific example. In the 2024 budget that was tabled in Parliament last year, with some fanfare, the Prime Minister announced that the allocation for the state governments, in terms of giving them incentives to preserve their forest cover, was increased from, if I'm not mistaken, 70 or 80 million to 150 million. But I'm sure you guys have already forgotten that because there was no follow-up in terms of policy announcements and transparency. We don't know actually whether or not the amount was actually given out to the state governments. We don't know what is the mechanism to monitor. We don't know, what is the sort of like oversight body, whether it's going to be the National Land Council or some sort of a platform where the state government and the federal government can discuss these things. Right, so this is where I think those who are interested in policy can ask for more transparency, write more articles, talk about more of these things in forums like this, especially when policy makers are around. So that is the policy design part. The second part has got to do with policy promotion or publicity. And this is me putting on my former politician hat, whereby if let's say you are going to preserve the forest, you're going to preserve the sources of water, where the rivers that you take your drinking water from, you need to have very good social media campaigns to say that, look, if you're going to buy X amount of carbon credits from Bursa on the Bursa Carbon Exchange, Carbon X, this is the place that you are actually saving, right? To link that kind of personal touch, instead of just like paper certificates or electronic certificates that you can get that don't really mean much, if you can link that to something I can see and feel, right? So you mentioned Kedah. I've had the pleasure of going to Sungai Muda, the Muda sort of like a catchment area, and it's one of the best places to see elephants because they are just by the side of the river where the salt lakes are. Right, so that is something that we need to highlight more. I've had the pleasure of going to the Maliau Basin in Sabah. Not many politicians have been there before, but I went when I was a member of parliament because I wanted to see what was preserved there. Spent 5 days, 4 nights there. Wonderful place. I hope it doesn't get exploited. It's a bit too far away, not very touristy. But those are the kind of things that we need to showcase. If let's say you want to preserve Maliau Basin, this is what you're paying for, and people can see this is where my money is going.
But just picking up on a point that Dr. Dzaeman you raised, that if we start pricing these things in, so I'm now acting as the sort of alternate voice here, right? If we start pricing all of these things, the SMEs are bound to be jumping up and down, as in, we can't even survive now, the whole spiel. How do we deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a difficult thing. Right now, we're taking it for granted. Whatever nature does for us, it's pretty much free, right? It's, for example, like pollination, right? It's done for free. But if they calculate actually the services that bees provide, it's actually over 1 trillion, Can you imagine going to every single durian tree, for example, and having to fluff pollen on each of those flowers so that you actually get durians pollinated without bats? So these are the kind of values that we think. So until it gets to that tipping point, we can then start to put some sort of ways of managing it. Because the taxes and all of these things are designed so that you actually reduce your impact on some of this services environment. And it comes and it increases, and if no one follows it, it's going to be implemented as mandatory markets. Now it's voluntary market, carbon market, remember? Then it's going to be mandatory, and you don't want to reach that point. When we reach that point, that means there's something wrong already. Right now, we can survive if it's managed properly. So we don't want to reach to a point where it's then going to be reaching the tipping points.
Okay. I promise the audience that you can get to ask your questions, any questions on the floor. Yes, you have a question. Anyone else, please also raise up your hands so we can get maybe 2 or 3 together.
Thank you very much. I'm Sharifah Nurkamsia. I'd like to make a reference to Professor Ong's advocacy for not looking just at the industry, but actually at a whole life cycle. I'd like to recommend that following the nuclear industry, because when they are measuring the carbon emission, they don't just say what the power plant is producing. They look at the whole value chain from uranium exploration to enrichment and fuel preparation right up to waste management. So I think maybe for the industry, we need to look at developing a life cycle for them so that at the end we will know holistically how much carbon is being emitted. Secondly, I'd like to make a reference to the other gentleman saying that currently most SMEs might not be familiar or know how to make measurements, and maybe it will take 2 to 5 years. But I'd like to share that although Paris Agreement had told us that 2050 is the end game for mankind, but from our discussion in the past 2 days, there was a lot of worry and concern that it's not so long, it could be 2040. And in fact, I also shared the recent statement by UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres that the latest study shows that the carbon budget is only 200 billion left. And the study shows that yearly 40 billion is being spewed up. So that means there's only 5 years before 1.5 is reached. So I think we do not have time for the SMEs to have 2 to 5 years to learn how to measure. Maybe the Ministry of Industry working with some of the NGOs could quickly prepare a guideline like UOB had very kindly prepared for their customers. This is how you measure your carbon footprint and what you need to do. And last but not least, about capital markets, Professor Ong, you mentioned about how the market could help. May I recommend that we look at nuclear, because the Director General of International Energy Agency, Dr. Fateh Birol, has mentioned that when we are going to address climate change, the narrative is not RE or nuclear. Now it has to be renewable energy and nuclear power. So based on that, I'd like to recommend Malaysia and ASEAN and the region to look at including nuclear in the taxonomy, because some countries have also included nuclear in the green bonds. So these might be some of the, I would say, prescription for success for Malaysia and the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you.
Okay, thanks Sharifah for those 3 very comprehensive questions. On the life cycle analysis part, I'll take that first. You can actually apply it to many sectors of the economy. You know, the whole focus now on EV as a way for mitigating carbon emissions usually doesn't take into account the mining processes for many of the components that go into the batteries. Whatever companies are doing in Indonesia, mining nickel and things like that. So I think that's something important to note. But my sense is that we are. Let's focus more on Malaysia first, because this is the context that we're in. We can't take that big jump before taking small steps. So, for example, if we can't even implement some sort of end-of-life pricing policy for consumer goods like fridges and computers and things like that for disposal, which many developed countries have done, that life cycle analysis won't mean much, right? So I think identifying smaller and more practical steps so that we can get into bigger kind of analysis, that would be something I would recommend on the first part. On the second part, you talked about us not having enough time, MITI or other government agencies needing to ramp activity up. I would say the focus shouldn't be on SMEs first because of the lack of capacity that we mentioned just now, and there are just too many of them across 2 diverse sectors. It would be much better, I think, to amplify the approach that Bursa, SC, Bank Negara, JC3 is taking. Focus on the capital markets first, the listed entities, the big guys, to give them the proper incentives, and the banks like UOB and others coming in, to give them the proper financing so that they can capture as much of these best practices as possible with the proper financial incentives, and with them being able to implement, let's say better scope 1, scope 2, later on scope 3 reporting, invest in decarbonization depending on which sector you are in. Some are more, some have heavier carbon emissions than others, cement, steel, power generation, transportation. Then hopefully, you will have the frameworks that can sort of like go into other sectors of the economy at the SME level. So I'll give you a very concrete example. We have green building index classifications now, right? Platinum, gold, silver, and energy efficiency is definitely one of them. Probably can be enhanced. But we don't have similar kind of measurements or sort of like classification for factories. We don't have those kinds of measurements for industrial parks. Right? So if let's say we have those, and then we give the proper incentives for listed companies to use this as part of their scope 1, scope 2 reporting, then there can be proper pricing. It can be reflected in the financing. It can be reflected in their ESG reports to Bursa. And that, I think, may be a reference point that we can use for the SMEs. Sorry, the final point. Nuclear, okay, I've had a lot of discussions on this with the former radar president, Dato NK Tong. He's a very firm advocate for modular nuclear. I think the technology is still in the midst of being developed. The pricing probably needs to come down a bit more. And I think in the context of Malaysia, I go back to the first point that I made in the previous segment, which is we need to have better transparency and policy discussion with regards to nuclear. Because when you mention this, the man on the street, some politicians would immediately think of the kind of disaster kind of potential. I think there is something to be said there. The country that's producing the largest number of nuclear plants now is, of course, China. And they are also rolling out RE in a very big way. I think we should have that as an option because, there's only so many dams we can build in Sabah and Sarawak. There's only so many large-scale solar farms that we can build in Peninsular Malaysia. So nuclear should be part and parcel of that discussion.
Yeah, I think, Professor, you covered most of the points, but just to add on to the second point about SMEs angle, right? I think, like you mentioned, it's very important for the bigger players, to the listed companies and all that, to make the first step, because it's obviously they're the bigger emitters, right? If the SMEs want to play a role, I mean, there's a lot of emerging sort of smaller standards that you can jump on board. You don't have to jump on board like the major ones, because that's obviously very hard to access, right? And as long as you're measuring it correctly, to your best knowledge, I think you can then make a difference, right? So you don't have to wait until everything is set in stone and perfect. I think that's a big issue that, a lot of people wait for. Like, a lot of people are interested to fund biodiversity credits, for example, now, but they're waiting for the credit market to come up. You don't have to, and you don't necessarily have to fund a credit that can trade, right? If you're gonna really want to make an impact, you can fund a program which has set in stone and it's not a tradable commodity, Why would you want to trade it? You want to trade it because it adds value and then it becomes a commodity, right? You do not necessarily have to wait for it to become a commodity. You can just pay for the goodwill of it and basically your standard CSR sort of initiatives.
Yeah, so just to add on to that, since Sharifah talked about, MITI just now, MITI actually came out with or industry ESG measurement framework earlier this year. And I think that can actually be very useful for industry, the SME players, to use as a reference point. The only challenge is you have to invest, you have to pay for the initial sort of like implementation of the IESG to get the service providers to come in to help train the SMEs. But till now, we haven't seen a concrete announcement on the funding structure and the rollout structure by MITI on this particular program.
There's actually a very good question, I think, which segues into that, and I apologize. I said I'll come to the audience, but I see about 4 votes for this online question, so let me bring that up. and that is about the skepticism of investors. And I think they've just said investors, but can I broaden that to skepticism of maybe even board of directors, maybe even management, in terms of how they view investments into ecosystems, right? The biodiversity angle. How can we overcome that? Any thoughts?
I think at the moment, right, it's very difficult. A lot of companies are doing it for image, public kind of perception of it, you know. The regulators, the funders as well are also looking into stop funding, you know, very high impact kind of programs and going for more renewables and stuff. So there's two kind of pressures, right? So I think the pressure comes from the public, and that's very strong, a strong pressure, you know. People are wanting to move towards, when they can, move towards more affordable, renewable kind of materials, and when they can. So I think it's shifting towards that.
Yeah, I wouldn't so much use the word diversity because or biodiversity, because large corporates and even SMEs, they go into the larger ESG agenda for all sorts of different reasons. Biodiversity may not necessarily be very, very high on the agenda. Most of it is initially compliance, right? You're shifting from CSR to something that's a little bit more concrete, and you know, there may be some financial incentives in terms of capital markets, carbon markets, you know, carbon taxes that or CBAM that you have to respond to, right? So I think if, let's say, there could be some good use cases in Malaysia whereby such measures, whether it's on the ES or the G part, can be done in a way that is financially not too burdensome and maybe even attractive. You know, that could be something that can be used for other people to follow. So, for example, if, let's say, I'm not sure, this is not a very halal kind of thing, but if, let's say, I'm a brewery, one of the major sort of like raw materials I have to use is the water supply, right? And if, let's say, the water supply that I have to use may include, you know, tapping into water from some of the water streams that are near my factory, and if, let's say, I can put in money to make sure that the upstream sources, you know, of upstream water source is not polluted by working with industry and other, you know, commercial entities upstream, then that can be a value proposition that I can properly price into my own manufacturing ecosystem, right? And if, let's say, we can get other people who are, you know, discharging, you know, effluents, hopefully treated effluents into the river, factories and other commercial entities, then that can be a small pilot project that you can start. You know, you get funding in from government, from private sector, and then use that as a test case for maybe other areas that you can use, and hopefully reduce our pollution in our rivers.
I think we got really great policies in place. I think the most difficult part is the implementing, right? Who's going to be basically measuring and ensuring that these factories and all that are complying to that?
Yeah, and it is not just the measuring, the implementation part. You know, one of the biggest challenges that I've seen and faced myself as a former policymaker is that to get the decision makers to understand policy design, that is actually very, very difficult, right? Later on, YB may be able to elucidate more. He's one of the few who actually understands policy and policy designs, but you can't say the same for many others out there in the ecosystem.
But beyond that, and again, tapping into my own background and profession, while policy and all is really vital, the funding doesn't seem to be anywhere close to what we need. You know, and I think there was meant to be a presentation by Faizal, but effectively, he was going to speak about the fact that today there's about 200 billion that are being invested into nature-based solutions. Sounds like a lot, but not to me, because there's 7 trillion of capital which are in sectors which are harming the environment, right? So we've got a massive flip to make. I want to acknowledge, I think, the earlier question about time. Time is not something we have. We keep using a word called adaptation. I struggle with that term. It's not adaptation. It's facing the brunt of what we're going to experience. I think we need a somewhat stronger word for that, but Again, I only know numbers. You guys know words, so maybe you'll need to come up with that. Any questions from the floor? We've got 5 minutes left. The gentleman here to my right.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, thank you for the great discussion today. I just want to ask, how can you actually, because we're talking about ecosystem services and how capital can actually support that. And I think some people are not aware that there are already certain schemes, like certification schemes on sustainable forestry, or like plastic going into the ocean, and even the AWS for water supply and things like that, right? So how can we actually direct the industry towards realizing the benefits that these things provide, and actually including that into their supply chain, and ensuring that they are supporting sustainable sourcing, right, instead of going into sources that are not sustainable? How can we actually link this? Thank you.
Is there another question? No. Okay.
How do you link this, right? I think a lot of times it comes down to the pricing, right? Yeah. If you do not pay for it, you do not realize what you're paying for, right? So you're taking it for granted again, So I think that was the kind of the biggest component that I want to add. I think you had something to add on the FSC.
Yeah, so I think the regulation part in terms of standards and certifications is something that we haven't really discussed in detail. So I was talking about the FSC, the Forest Stewardship Certification, where most of our, I would say, hopefully all of our timber products that are exported to developed markets will require that kind of certification, and I think we've handled that relatively well, although there's still some gaps here and there. We have developed quite robust MSPO standards in Malaysia. I think it's a pretty good standard, probably better than our neighbors, and most of our big guys are already RSPO compliant, right? So there is these kinds of standards, but I think to what extent do the people who invest in those standards, meaning the suppliers, get to benefit from a price premium? I think that one is still to be discussed. The palm oil players, the international ones, have no choice but to comply to RSPO. But many of them complain and say that your FMCG producers, your F&B producers, they're not willing to pay usually a higher price for RSPO compared to other alternative sort of like raw materials, so to speak, or processed materials. So I think that's still an ongoing discussion. My hope is that if we can get more startup activity in Malaysia in this kind of sustainability ecosystem, we would hopefully have more fruitful use cases to be discussed. And then next time you have something like this, you can have even one whole day just focusing on startups and the VC activity that are looking into specific issues that we've discussed very, very generally here. And that, I think, would really invigorate the conversation in Malaysia and Southeast Asia to a whole new level.
I hope that answered the question. With 1 minute left, can I just turn to Dr. Dzaeman to close? Prof. Ong.
Yeah, I think I would like to thank the organizers again for hosting this event. I think it's really great to have the kind of biodiversity component and the nature component kind of streamlined, mainstreamed pretty much. And we do see that, this conversation is, trickling all the way up to, leaders of governments and states and things like this. So it's really great. 10 years ago when we first started some of our initiatives, we were banging on doors trying to get support for things, but it's really shifting. So I'm quite positive that, within the next couple of years, we're going to be able to kind of implement a lot of these plans. So looking forward to that, stay positive, yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe just a couple of final thoughts. I think it would be interesting to see whether the government would be open to having a proposal to have a chief sustainability officer in each of its, each ministry. Yeah. Each ministry is supposed to already have a chief digital officer. It would be one of the TKSUs or one of the SUBs that are adopting this role. But it would be good, if let's say we can have that kind of CSO role for the civil service, that's one. Second thing is, I think it would be much more interesting also if, let's say, the university ecosystem, of which I belong to now, could channel more of its research and teaching and student activities into climate-related areas, so that they also can be part and parcel of the larger discussion ecosystem. Thanks.
I think those are great points. I don't want to have the last word on this. I think the role of the capital market in supporting nature and its ecosystem services, we are actually just beginning. Again, it might surprise you, but I keep saying this, but as an accountant, I struggle with the fact that biodiversity credits are priced at $10 US. And what do we pay for a price of oil per barrel? So with that, I'll leave you all to think about that. And I thank the panelists for a great engaging session. If you could please give them a round of applause.
There we go. Thank you once again, Mr. Martin, Professor Ong, and Dr. Dzaeman. Thank you so much for your time, and also it is such a delightful session indeed. We'd like to take a group photo of the three of you in the center. There we go. And again, to those of you who are currently viewing our event here virtually, we thank you for your support. Please continue to, if you have any further questions, you may also submit those questions via the WOVA app. There we go. Can we give Mr. Martin, Professor Ong, and Dr. Dzaeman another round of applause, please? Thank you very much. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have another special guest that is kind enough to join us here today and grace our event with his presence. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, I would like to warmly invite for our next keynote, we have a sustainable investing, greening, and growing our economy at once. Our speaker for this is a dedicated Malaysian politician known for his significant contributions to sustainable development and social justice. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big hand to Yang Berhormat Liew Chin Tong, Deputy Minister of Investment, Trade and Industry, MITI, Malaysia.
Thank you. Thank you to Datin Sri Sunita Rajakumar, Chair of Climate Governance Malaysia, for inviting me. I wasn't sure whether I should turn it down, so eventually I accepted it. Last year I also came to this conference, and I'm very glad that I'm here again. We are dealing with, and also I would like to acknowledge the presence of a very kind minister, former minister who was very kind to me when I was in the opposition, Dato Mustapa Mohamed. I learned a lot from him, and I think he's a great asset to the nation who has vast experience in policy making. We are grappling with a difficult and long-lasting challenge. The challenge will come, there'll be more challenges that we'll have to deal with. But I think fundamentally we need to see things differently. In order for us to do things differently, we will have to have a different perspective on how we deal with the challenges. The climate crisis is not a fiction, but the same prisoner's dilemma applies if we continue to see the environment as an externality. The same old cliche will see dealing with the climate as a cost, and we'll keep debating who should bear the cost. But what if dealing with the climate can be a source of growth? What if the growth we pursue itself can be inherently green? The unity government led by Prime Minister Dato Sri Anwar Ibrahim has set the narrative right. In his Madani economy framework that he unveiled in July 2023, he articulated the idea of raising the ceiling and raising the floor in every economic actions that we pursue. So we are very clear that when we talk about the economy, we no longer subscribe to the idea that growth would trigger down and you just have to pursue growth without having to do anything else because it will happen naturally. I think we have, based on the Madani economic framework, it is very clear that this government and in general we hope that will stop subscribing to the idea that economy, as long as there will be growth, as long as there's growth, you just have to generate growth, everything else will be taken care of. We have moved away from that. We have moved away from the idea that growth is for its own sake. And we have also moved away from the old idea of trickle-down economics, which basically argues that as long as there's growth, any growth, the benefit will trickle down to the masses without any other actions. So this is, I think, the core idea in PM's articulations of raising the ceiling and raising the floor concurrently. The Madani Economy Framework was reinforced by the National Energy Transition Roadmap, NETR, and the New Industrial Master Plan 2030. The NETR outlines the need and the opportunities for new investment to the tune of 1.2 to 1.3 trillion ringgit into greening the economy and to reach net zero. Actually, it's a flip side. While some people will think that this is the cost that the society will have to bear, but on the other hand, this is also an opportunity for the entire economy to invest in green growth. The New Industrial Master Plan 2030 made a major departure from the previous approach towards industry. NIMP 2030 adopted the idea of mission, advocated by Mariana Mazzucato, that the economy requires the policymakers to have a clear mission, or to have clear missions, and steer the capital or investment into achieving those missions. NIMP 2030 set out 4 missions for the new wave of industrialization, namely, to build a more complex economy. We want more value adding into the economy. We want more value adding activities in our industries. Second, to tech up, as in to innovate, to adopt IT, to adopt AI, to adopt innovation, to automate and to mechanize. Third, to push for net zero. And fourth, to ensure economic security and economic inclusivity. Our idea of mission is that we are not just talking about individual mission, but we are talking about achieving those missions concurrently and changing the way we measure success. Building on the announcement of former Prime Minister Dato Sri Ismail Sabri on Malaysia attaining net zero as early as 2050, Prime Minister Anwar has now said that Malaysia will reach net zero by 2050. I think this is a very significant step forward taken by the government that will guide all other economic decisions moving forward. That means the nation has committed itself to net zero as early as 2050 during the speech by Prime Minister Ismail Sabri in 2022. But it is now setting itself to achieving or to push for net zero by 2050. The National Investment Council, chaired by Prime Minister Anwar, has approved the Green Investment Strategy in its July meeting, which set out clearly for quick wins of solar, of electric vehicles, to main focus of carbon storage and green hydrogen, to new opportunities and also to emerging technology frontier. I think those are the potential investment opportunities that we will now want to pursue, and clearly we have adopted a mindset, we have adopted a paradigm shift to now see green as an investment opportunity. Where there's a long road ahead in our nation's push to net zero, at the least I'm glad that this government has put in the right framework and has accepted the intellectual premises that growth has to be green, and green growth is an opportunity, not a burden. Mazzucato, in her book Mission Economy, used the case of the Apollo project to put man on the moon, to showcase how innovations such as GPS or baby formula were created in order to achieve a mission, to put United States astronaut on the moon by the end of 1960s. The same goes to the rush to develop COVID-19 vaccines. When the world put its resources on an urgent mission to save life, and indeed save the humankind, several vaccines were created within less than a year time. Hence, when we think about investing, we need to be reminded that investing is not just for investment's sake. Investment's ultimate aim is to solve a certain societal problem, not just to make profits, or while making profit. While we may forget, it wasn't lost on the leaders and policymakers when Malaysia first embarked on its export-led industrialization back in the early 1970s. At that time, the leaders knew that we as a nation allowed for factories to be set up in Penang, in Petaling Jaya, in Shah Alam, to create jobs that pay better than traditional domestic jobs. So to deal with the explosive growth of post-war baby boomers who needed jobs when they grown into adulthood by the 1960s. So that was the origins of our export-led industrialization policy. Our export-led industrialization policy was meant to create jobs, which is why I say it's important for us to always ask what is the mission, why are we doing this, and why are we making a certain economic decision. It is not for profit alone, but it is for a mission or to resolve a societal problem. To think about growing green and green growth in Malaysia in the 2020s, there are several paradigm shifts we will need to make and to bring the society along. Very often when it comes to the debate of environment, when it comes to the debate of climate, of emission, we adopted a very adversarial way of communication. Our conversation is adversarial. Our conversation is not of one that built new consensus. Of course, building new consensus is difficult, especially if you're faced with a stone wall, a wall of old mindsets. But I think we are now having the opportunity to build a more constructive and more consensus conversation in Malaysia, so that we can build societal consensus and bring the society along. Some of the mindset shift I think is important. First, we will have to be very clear that investment must bring domestic benefits, and we have to articulate them clearly. The national investment aspirations and the goals set out in the new Industrial Master Plan 2030 should be the subjects of public discussions and not just the absolute number of a certain investment project. We're very used to talk about investment figures alone, but it's now time to talk about more than just investment figure alone. And this was not started just by this government. The previous government has set out the national investment aspiration and its 6 measurements. I think this is something credit to Topa and also to other people who have actually contributed, including BNM, to contributed to the idea that investment cannot just be articulated with figures, with numbers, but investment has to be articulated in a more broader context with explanations of broader benefits to the society. We will need to articulate who each investment creates, what jobs each investment creates, and also help in the journey of our nation's push for net zero. For instance, Tunku Zarful Aziz, Minister of Investment, Trade and Industry, appointed an independent committee chaired by HSBC CEO Dato Omar Siddiq to look into the twin sustainability of the steel industry, namely to how to strengthen the financial viability of the sector and how to reach net zero goal at once. Okay, the steel industry is difficult, very difficult. I have been in this role since December 2022. Quite a bit of my time is spent on trying to understand and trying to rethink and reorganize the steel industry. But we recognize that we need to deal with the twin sustainability. The sector has to be viable, the sector has to be able to go to the banks, and the banks has to be willing to give loan. But at the same time, the steel industry will have to be able to be part of the conversation of net zero, or net zero has to be central in the conversation of the steel industry. And this is where it is difficult, but it's something that we are doing and we want to do more. And we need to do more in not just the steel industry, but in every industry. Second, we have to balance supply and demand. Malaysia is good at planning supply. We are very used to planning supply, and we have indeed met most of the supply requirements, such as electricity and other infrastructure. When we're faced with a problem, our instinct is to provide additional supply. One classic example is congestion. When there's a traffic congestion, we build more roads. But if we look carefully at the problem, the traffic congestion or the jam happens only during peak hours, not during the other 80 or 90% of the time. For instance, there's a HO debate about toll road. Should we think about demand management? Right? We always think about supply. Perhaps it's time for us to think about demand management. And toll road is a good example. The old debate is whether to remove toll rate, toll altogether, or to reduce toll prices. Can we repurpose the toll, or at least for urban roads, that users who use toll roads during non-peak hours get a discount? Can we repurpose the toll roads as a way to do reverse congestion pricing? Maybe we should think about that. Because, of course, the moment you say you want to do congestion pricing, everyone will jump. But we have a tool that we can potentially do reverse congestion pricing, as in discount, during non-peak hours. Maybe some of these things we should explore. As far as water is concerned, not only we should keep building more water supply, we should invest a lot more on better piping to reduce non-revenue water. We should also start targeting large unit of users, large user, to get them not to in an adversarial way, but to get them really to look at their processes and how they can save water by improving their processes. I used to spend a lot of time thinking about water and being briefed on how water is managed. If you do a water audit of a factory, effectively you are also auditing the use of electricity. You are also auditing the use of labor. And we should really do a lot more of this, so that to manage supply and manage demand, not just to provide supply. And I think this is a very important paradigm shift that we need to do. And that will bring in investment, it will bring in efficiency, it will bring higher productivity. But one of the biggest challenges is how to deal with our cities. Elsewhere, I've said that we as Malaysians, we have become American before we got rich. We adopted a model of sprawling our city to 50 kilometers, 100 kilometers away from Kuala Lumpur. We have adopted the private car ownership model. Last year, Malaysia sold 790,000 cars. I was just told, I saw some Singaporeans yesterday. They told me the cap in Singapore, the entire Singapore cap is 660,000 cars. Of course, Singapore is very small, okay? But still, Malaysia sold more cars in a year compared to the entire cap of Singapore. So we may have to start thinking about a different way of handling our cities. If we may have to start thinking about bringing people back to the inner city. In KL, everyone says that KL is congested. Actually, not true. You walk, it's not congested. If you walk in KL inner city, it is actually not congested. But you drive, of course. And if you drive during the peak hours, is of course, traffic is bad. So we have to start rethinking about how to create a city so that young people do not have to buy a house, own a house 100 kilometers away from KL and come to work to KL in the morning. We will have to create housing stock in the inner city so that young people of the next generations do not have to think about owning a house. They can rent in the inner city, they can walk to work, they can take public transport to work, and they don't have to spend more than 15 minutes to commute to work. I think we have to start asking those questions so that we don't have to keep thinking about building infrastructure 50, 100 kilometers away from the city. And this is not just applicable to Kuala Lumpur. When you think about a small city like Kluang, you think about a city like Kuantan, you think about many other cities. Instead of building so many tamans, it's time for us to come back to inner city, at least for the next generation. Fourth, Malaysia must be at the forefront of innovating affordable, I stress the word affordable, technology to solve our problems, including food security and climate challenges. For instance, the Netherlands is a major exporter of food and agricultural products. I'm told that some of the onion that we consume is actually exported from the Netherlands. But we all know that the Netherlands has very little land and very little other resources. It is technology that tilts the balance. Malaysia has one of the best weather for most agricultural products, but we don't link technology with agriculture. Malaysia should have been known, or should be known as the leader in agriculture technology, in green technology, and on all fronts. Fifth, getting the price right. The previous session I heard, when I came in, I heard questions about price. Very often, those who think that the push for net zero is a cost center is looking at the current price structure. We will have to create a new price structure. For instance, we'll have to start the conversation of carbon measurement. You have to first measure before you can start talking about pricing. Then, with a price, you can start talking about trading or taxing. We will have to start that conversation in a more robust manner. We will have to say that maybe we don't have to tax so soon. Maybe we don't have to tax all sectors so soon. Maybe we just have to focus 1 or 2 sectors or 3 sectors for carbon tax. But nonetheless, in order to be able to have a conversation about pricing carbon, we need to start measurement for everything. When we start measuring, then we can later on with the facts decide on whether we want to trade. We can decide on price. Once we have a price, we can say, okay, let's trade, not tax. Or let's trade most of the sector, but tax only a very small number of sectors. But that conversation has to start. Malaysia is blessed with the fact that we have plenty of land covered by forests and potentially more secondary forests. If there's a right price for carbon offset, protecting our forests would be something both noble and one that generates sustainable revenue. Getting the price right is also include dealing with the federal state incentive structure. At the moment, most of the revenue generated by the state governments are from exploiting natural resources and sprawling the city. Here, the state government can only gain revenue by selling land. Therefore, the state government has to sell land, otherwise they sell forests, otherwise or logging rights, or they sell reclamation rights, because the structure is such that the state government do not have revenue beyond natural resources and land. The ecology fiscal transfer, EFT, is a start. Okay, we have started this ecology fiscal transfer, but more should follow. We need to get the price right to create a lot more mechanisms that generate revenue for the state government from sustainable sources. So I've outlined some of my views. To conclude, over the past year or so, We have set the right frameworks and move along the right track. But there's a lot more whole of government approach that is needed, a whole of government mindset shift that is needed. It cannot just be silos everywhere, but we have to reach a whole of government mindset shift. And more importantly, whole of society consensus building, which I think your conference is meant for. And we need to build societal consensus so that this is not an adversarial conversation. This is not seen as a burden, but this is seen as an opportunity for green growth, an opportunity for Malaysia to be a leader in green growth. Thank you very much.
There we go, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Yang Berhormat. It goes to show that greening our economy is bigger than profiting from our economy. And the implication is that the fight for a better and greener future is a fight in which we are all involved in. Ladies and gentlemen, please fill out our survey form for you to provide us with feedbacks in regard to the event. All right, all you have to do is scan the QR code that is currently being shown on screen right now. Simply fill out our very brief survey form, and we would be delighted if you could do so. All right, once you're done, ladies and gentlemen, I now invite you for a quick break, 10 minutes. So please be back on time, yeah? We will start the next session at 11:25. Thank you very much. See you soon. All right, let's continue on with our panel discussion. We have for the topic, aspiring to be nature positive. And ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce our moderator. Has an educational background in environmental management and is currently pursuing a PhD in river health, science and technology studies at the University of Malaya. He is the Senior River Care Program Officer at GEC. Please welcome Sathis Venkitasamy. And ladies and gentlemen, for our first panelist, we have a passionate and collaborative executive with over 15 years of successful leadership in shaping sustainability strategy for Fortune 500 global corporations. Ladies and gentlemen, the Chief Sustainability Officer of Petronas Chemicals Group Berhad. Please welcome Gretchen Giovoni. Our next panelist is responsible in leading Maybank Group's sustainability efforts, focusing on ESG practices. Please welcome Shahril Azwar Jimin, Maybank's first Group Chief Sustainability Officer. Ladies and gentlemen, from banking, we now shift to a brewing company. Our final panelist has over 25 years of experience in corporate law and 15 years in corporate affairs. Please give a big hand to the Corporate Affairs and Legal Director of Heineken Malaysia, Renuka Indraraja. Sathis, the stage is all yours.
Hello, okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for all of you joining for today's panel session. It's a very important topic. It's about aspiring to be nature positive. Okay, thank you MC for already introducing the panel members, so make my life and work easier. Okay, I'm very privileged to be here with three esteemed panel members. Okay. Maybe before we start, okay, let me give some thoughts on this topic. Okay, nature positive. A nature positive approach purifies water, enriches biodiversity, cuts emissions, stores carbon, reduces pandemic risk, and so on. In short, a nature positive approach enhances the resilience of our planet as well as our societies and communities. With the term itself referring to positive is, as you know, a mathematical term, it needs proper indicators as well as metrics to realize this. I think earlier we had a recording from post-M development professor. He was talking about planetary boundaries. And we know now by crossing 6 out of 9 planetary boundaries, we really need impactful action by all. So today, let's hear from the corporations and businesses on their role as well as aspirations on nature positive. Before that, let me quickly go through for today's flow. First round, we will hear the thoughts from each panel member. Okay, some of them have presentations, and we will have Q&A session. So to manage time effectively, you can post your questions in the WOWA app. I think all of you already, when you came in, you used the app, right? So you can go to the session and click the questions from the audience tab, you can post your questions. And also, I want to emphasize that when you ask your questions, please be direct, short, as well as maybe we avoid very technical questions, because today we are talking about more on the aspirations to be a nature positive. Okay, without further ado, I would like to invite our first panel member, Mr. Sharil, for his thoughts on this. Floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Satish. I was asked to have a few slides up front, so yeah, maybe just as an introduction to the what we're going to talk about from Maybank's perspective. But thank you again, Satish, and thank you to Climate Governance Malaysia for inviting Maybank to be part of this. We are constantly aware of the financial institutions' role in addressing the current issues, particularly of climate action and also now being nature positive. The imperative is that being a bank, we are in a position to create systemic change, given the association through lending, financing, advisory work that we do through multitude of clients. Well, in the case of Maybank, not just in Malaysia, but in 18 countries globally, in all the 10 ASEAN countries. So we do our part, trying to make sure that we halt the worst effects on nature and reverse the losses on biodiversity and environment and so on, and ultimately through to the goals of making 2030 a better place in terms of nature against 2020. So for a bank, what does that ultimately mean? That ultimately means looking differently at how we approach our business. So I like to say that being nature positive is actually a disruption, because it forces everybody, and certainly not least banks, to rethink how we have been doing things in the past. So one of the things that we have been doing for the last few years is how do we vigorously incorporate ESG considerations into credit. And this is something that the team and I have been doing over the last so many years, working with our relationship managers. How do we integrate ESG principles into everything that we do, and primarily in terms of our relationship with our clients. So we have done this. We have reviewed our risk acceptance criteria to make sure that there are ESG considerations into it. We've looked at all our industry sectors. We do stress testing and scenario analysis. We even have a geospatial platform now. Whenever we want to give out loans, we see what kind of harm that may impact in terms of the environment and so on. And so that's been a different way of how we've been doing things. And once we have that, we come up with various platforms, particularly frameworks. We were the first bank in Malaysia to come up with a sustainable product framework. We launched our transition finance framework at COP28 in Dubai last year. And with that, we're able to mobilize sustainable finance. And that's important, because then that will address the issues that are on hand, including about being nature positive today. With that as well, then we re-enhance our commitment to biodiversity, and not just through our lending, but through all our other actions, which I will share later, including supporting things like tiger conservation. We are the biggest funder for tiger conservation to WWF Malaysia, among others. And not just that, not forgetting that ultimately it's about the people, right? It's about the people. We do a lot of capacity building, we do a lot of community resilience efforts and so on. So I mentioned about how do we look at our industry sectors. This is the complicated part. Today, we have done intensive review of 7 industry sectors through initially a Scrum methodology, not just internally, but we work with industry experts, we work with clients, and Scrums are longer processes. Some are shorter actions that we do, we call sprints. So for example, just last week we did a sprint on water. How can we best go to market to help our clients and also make sure that the environment is taken care of in water? So we had span within that session, for example, you know. So and these are the sectors that we feel highly vulnerable. We call them ESG, high-risk ESG sectors, from agriculture, forestry, logging, to even transportation. So these are the things that we do. Ultimately, it's about how do we incorporate ESG considerations, not just in terms of how we act, how do we save water internally, how do we look at our scope 1 and scope 2, but ultimately scope 3, and also how do we incorporate ESG into credit, as I mentioned. And finally, this is the last of my 3 slides. Being transparent, being authentic in terms of what we do, particularly in terms of reporting. We have a whole suite of reports in addition to our annual report and sustainability report. This year, for the first time, we launched from as a bank within the region, we launched our own environmental report as well. And this is in preparation for TNFD, yeah, for what we are here today to talk about. And more recently, we also launched our social impact report to make sure that whatever we do also addresses ultimately what matters most, which is the people. Yeah. So, yeah, Satish.
Thank you, Mr. Sharil. It's good to see the holistic approach that been practiced by Bank across all the operation, covering through your 4 sustainability commitment, and also good to see your standalone environmental report as well as a community report. Okay, with that, let's move to Gretchen to talk on, to give your thoughts on this topic. Over to you.
Okay, great. Is that working? Okay, great. You know, I thought I would talk about how companies might approach nature. You know, we've been doing climate for some time, but nature, that's different. So I started doing, working on climate and sustainability more than 20 years ago. Not really because of climate at the time, because I was a nature lover. And so I was doing environmental compliance, and I wanted to do positive good, and switched over then into doing sustainability. It's been a long 20 years, I have to say. You know, it took a long time to understand climate and what companies were supposed to do, and setting goals and driving goals. And the whole global infrastructure was not out there to make it happen. Even now, it's very hard, right? But it's moving along, and nature is starting to follow the path that climate has laid out on the global landscape, and indeed in companies where we have sustainability people, we've got an infrastructure, we have goals, and we have a platform. So action on nature, I think, can accelerate at a much, much brisker clip than that climate has across time. Yeah, I'm an engineer, and so I think of solving problems and variables. Climate is actually pretty easy for companies. Look, it's about energy, greenhouse gases. We know what the substances are, we know what the impacts are, everything is published. And still, it's been difficult and a challenge, right? And a challenge to switch. Nature is much more difficult. It's a multivariate problem. Each company, each business, indeed each site has different impacts on nature and dependencies on nature. So this problem can follow climate, but it is more complex in needing to understand the specific indicators, attributes, effects to be able to progress. So there are some, there are the structures out there. The UNFCCC, this audience will be very familiar with, but also we have the UN CBD, working towards biodiversity, that was not even a conversation really in companies 10 years ago, not really much in 5 years ago, but now it's becoming somewhat mainstream. There's structures and guides out there for companies to follow. The World Business Council for Sustainable Development has roadmaps to net zero laid out for different industries and giving companies around the world a guide on action and what they can do. The World Economic Forum then has a chemical sector nature-specific action plan and guide that you can look at. Indeed, most of the guidance can be applied to other industries, and there's also other industrial guides. So there is plenty of guidance out there for companies on how to start, how to progress, and how to understand on nature. So what can companies do? Even before you've done specific assessments for your site, your company, there's plenty that you can do, and starting with the topic today, climate. Climate and nature are very tightly combined and impact each other. And so if you're working on your climate goals, you're also working on reducing impacts to nature. Water usage. Companies obviously have an idea, their water usage, water reduction, especially in water-stressed areas, is a short-term action that companies can take. Environmental compliance is also the other way to at least take action. So regulatory environmental compliance is set not specific to the company, but to the country, the region, maybe even the industry, but also reducing all the parameters that you have and you're working on for environmental compliance will also help nature. But then companies will need to figure out what is meaningful around nature beyond that, where they can make a specific impact. So how do companies then look at driving nature? And I relate back to years of trying to figure out of how to drive climate. The first thing is trying to get some engagement, socialization, and understanding within the company, and setting goals. Humans don't really work to net zero 2050 or really long-term goals because it's too far out there and it's too easy to slide action year by year. So companies need to set short-term goals, say 5 years, and also work towards the net zero goals and the net zero relation to with nature. And so if you can match up that timing with your climate program, and you can use the same climate structures that are in place already, you can accelerate your nature action pretty quickly. PCG has taken some great actions. Really proud that we're working towards net zero 2050. We've also set a 20% reduction climate goal by 2030. And we're working towards those and trying to figure out quite where we go on nature. So one of the things that companies can do on nature, one of the first things you need to do is get that understanding right. And one of the best actions that you can do is through your CSR programs. And so at PCG, we've been working on mangrove restoration. That has a climate impact, it has a nature impact. And it also brings employees, stakeholders out to take real action in the field and see where the mangroves have been hurting and taking positive action and help to make that connection between climate and nature. You need to have that connection, the understanding, in order to get the engagement, to set the goals, and then to drive action. So in summary, I think we can make really good progress. Businesses are starting to make progress. They're starting to understand. So for companies out there, and also, you know, for other stakeholders that are looking at what companies to do, we can use our structures and set goals on nature. We can work on water reduction, especially in stressed areas. We can work on environmental compliance in environmental areas we know that are business impacts. And then we also can do studies and figure out how do we potentially impact nature? How do we take action? Where are we dependent on nature? And being able to do that and take action, I think in the end will be helpful for companies. There'll be a positive action through all of this. You'll be reducing your risk. Perhaps you find opportunities for products, for growing your company. And so I encourage all the companies to go out there, look at the guidance, look at the steps that are out there, and follow along. You know, just like in the overall UN actions, follow along nature along with climate. Add that into your programs and start taking action, even as you're studying what your specific, site-specific, business-specific indications are.
Thank you, Gretchen. I think Gretchen was putting on how companies can start, as well as you was highlighting what Petronas already doing, especially in this mangrove conservation. Just to highlight, maybe many SMEs here, just to point out, there is actually this guidance called Science-Based Target Initiative or Science-Based Target Network, okay, where it's been guidance developed to start on actions on nature positive. So SMEs can also refer to that besides Bursa guidance, okay. And without further ado, let's move to Ms. Renuka on her thoughts on this, maybe on the water perspective. Okay, over to you.
Thank you, Satish. Firstly, very good morning to all of you, and thank you very much to Datin Sunita and team for the invitation here this morning to share our case study. So from Heineken, we're very happy that we have this opportunity to share the story of a 160-year-old Dutch multinational company, which has had a history of almost 65 years in Malaysia. About 17 years ago, we made the decision to take care of the river running behind our production site. And the reason we embarked on this project was because of the critical nature of water, not just to human life and to food security, but also for the long-term sustainability of our business. Water is a key ingredient to our products, and it's essential for us to take care of our water, our rivers. Rivers form 97% of the water supply in Malaysia, and yet a large portion of the rivers in Malaysia are still not clean. So as a company, we have a global strategy called the Brew a Better World strategy. It covers social sustainability, environmental sustainability, as well as advocating responsible consumption. In the area of environment, we have various initiatives moving the organization towards net zero. Circularity, we have achieved 100% of recycling our waste on the production site. And we are now moving towards healthy watersheds, and about to share that story with you about the work done there. Now, creating a healthy watershed is essential, not just for the well-being of communities, but as I mentioned, for the long-term sustainability of business. We adopt a three-pronged approach: water balancing, water circularity, and water efficiency. Now, the internal measures that we adopt are water efficiency, and as Gretchen mentioned earlier, the companies can look for many ways to reduce their water consumption, and we have done that year on year, setting ourselves targets, and we've managed to reduce our water usage by 21% versus the baseline in 2014. Now, moving ahead, we've set far more audacious targets for ourselves and year-on-year efficiency levels are expected and measured and reviewed globally to ensure that we get there. Now, the other measure is water circularity. We've invested into an effluent treatment plant so that all the water that is released from our production site not only meets but exceeds Department of Environment standards. So those are the measures that we've adopted internally. What we've done externally, a whole host of initiatives to get to our goal of being water balanced. Now you will ask, what is water balance? Water balance means that for every 1 liter of water that we use on our production site, we aim to replenish 1.5 liters back into the environment. Now we've done that, and over a period of 17 years, we've been doing work on rivers and watersheds. And since 2020, we're very proud to share that we've been more than 200% water balance. Moving on, these are some of the initiatives that we've carried out to get to that water balance status, keeping our watersheds healthy. So it started, as I mentioned earlier, with the river that runs behind our production site. When we started, local communities regarded the river as a dumping ground. They would toss out their daily garbage into the river. So we had a hard task. Fortunately, we met GEC, teamed up with them, and together we worked on educating the local community, creating the awareness, and it was a tough job. GEC would go door to door, knocking on doors, getting local communities to join the program. We took local communities up to the source of the river in Bukit Kiara, where the water is pristine, and we showed them the contamination that they are causing versus the clean water supply, and educated them that this is the water that ultimately comes out of their taps when they turn it on in the morning. So over the years, we've rehabilitated the river using not just changing the mindset of local communities, but installing rubbish traps and other infrastructure. And as you can see from the photo, creating little islands within the river to help increase biodiversity. So happy to share that in 2012, we were able to reintroduce fish into a river which was once a dead river. Today, sightings of birds, storks, dragonfly, and various variety of fish. Then we moved on into reforestation efforts in Raja Musa. Raja Musa is the source of our water. And what we decided to do there, once again with GEC and local communities, we constructed a 300-meter clay dike, Dutch technology. The reason we embarked on this, the clay dike helps to retain water in the soil, and this in turn prevents forest fires. Since the completion of the dike in 2019, there have been no forest fires in the area. This is an area which used to see forest fires occurring 1 to 2 times a year, devastating the peatland and obviously impacting the wildlife. So in the last 4 years, GEC tell us that the sightings of wildlife has actually increased in that area. And at the same time, we've also reforested the area, planting up to 3 hectares of mangrove swamp trees. Now, an important part in all the work we do is collaborating with local community, and at the same time looking to support them. So when we launched our rainwater harvesting systems, it was to take or give access to local communities who had no access to clean water. They use this water for cleaning purposes and also for irrigation. So with a number of these communities, we've also embarked on creating community gardens for them. So it's a nice tie-up. The water helps sustain the gardens, and the community now has a sustainable source of food. And the reason we embarked in the community gardens is that during COVID, we noticed a lot of the surrounding communities could not survive. They were daily paid workers who had no employment due to the lockdown. So we went from giving them food aid to creating a more sustainable solution of the community gardens. So these initiatives, as I mentioned, in partnership with Global Environment Center, working with 26 government agencies and 22 different communities, has led us to the result of being more than 200% water balance. The work we do is measured and verified by Limnotech on an annual basis. And it's using a volumetric water benefit accounting method by the World Resource Institute. So that brings me to the end of my presentation, where I just share with you the whole method we adopted. As Gretchen mentioned, understanding the issues in your organization by engaging the staff, engaging various stakeholders, and understanding what are the material issues impacting your business and looking for meaningful solutions. Also important to get the buy-in of top management, the CEO, the boards need to be on board, setting ambitious goals, creating a very clear strategy and roadmap how you're going to get there. For us, it was important to establish a sustainability governance model which encompasses all the different departments in the organization, and we have leaders from different sections taking charge of things which are outside their comfort zone, just to give complete ownership of the ESG agenda to the whole organization. We leverage on strategic partnerships, as I've mentioned in the earlier example, and the work we do is regularly measured and reported. We're very transparent in our annual report, highlighting not only what's going well, but what are the gaps that we have and how we propose to meet those gaps. So it's a constant journey, continuous effort, always looking for improvements. How do we raise the bar on sustainability and constant learning? And the whole reason we're here today is to keep sharing our story in the hope of encouraging other Malaysian corporates to join us on the journey. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Renuga. It's good to see what Anakin is doing in a holistic manner on water and water resource protection, as well as good to see how the initiatives can be quantified. Just some thoughts. Recently, I attended this 10th World Water Forum in Bali, the largest World Water Forum. There was one session talking about water neutral or water positive, because people want to standardize with carbon neutral. And they see carbon got a lot of financing and funding, and water and everything just has been neglected. So there was one session just to talk about a good term to attract financing. At the end, we concluded that it's better to stay with water positive, because we don't want water neutral. Carbon can be neutral. We don't want more carbon. Carbon can be neutral, but water as well in nature to be positive. Just some thoughts when we are talking about water. Okay. Without further ado, let me go back to our Q&A session, okay, because we have 10 more minutes. Maybe I'll pick the question from the app. I can see a couple of questions are already there, okay. Maybe the first question, maybe I'll address to Mr. Sharil, okay. What are the potential trade-offs between our business objectives and nature positive commitments, and how we will address them? Yeah.
Thank you, Satish. When you talk about trade-offs in terms of these kind of things, we go beyond nature. It's not just nature. There's also the climate issues. There's also social considerations. So I look at it from an ESG or sustainability perspective. What are the trade-offs? I think today the world has gone past short-termism. We've already agreed that sustainability is a long-term play. Otherwise, it won't be 2050, it won't be 2030 or 2100, right? And ultimately, it's on a longer-term play. You have to take the business philosophy on a longer-term perspective. Shareholders and investors are already realizing that. I make frequent presentations to investors and shareholders. They are on the ball with that. They are with us in that respect. Some organizations have just stopped giving out quarterly results because it tends to divert your attention from things that need to be done on a longer term imperative. There would be, but there is already starting to be empirical evidence that companies which adopt strong ESG practices are giving better total shareholder return in the longer run. Yeah, and you're saying that companies which adopt better sustainability practices are already attracting better quality candidates, better quality talent, and so on. And I think that's important, because at the end of the day, when you talk about trade-offs, it's you just have to do it. You know, you just have to do it. We have in Maybank, one of the things as part of our sustainability agenda, we never forget the S and the G. And then of course we talk about the E, like what we're doing today, but it's always the S and the G. The previous chair of the Securities Commission recently said, and I love that, he said, look, if any company does not have a strong G, forget what they say about the E and the S. Yeah. So Dr. Sri Awadi said that, and I agree with that. So in Maybank, we have a very robust governance system premised upon our EXCO Sustainability Committee and our Board Sustainability Committee, right? And we base on that to make sure that we do the right thing. So one of the things that we say when we do the right things is that any loan that may have adverse ESG impact does not just go to the Group Management Credit Committee, but comes to the EXCO Sustainability Committee. We discussed that, right? And we actually decline about half of the proposals that come. We actually decline about half we could be making a lot more money, but we actually decline that. And some of the things that come our way, very surprising, yeah? People getting huge concessions, yeah? Huge concessions, and thinking it's money in the bank. Well, it's not money in our bank. We will decline that. Yeah, so if you see that as a trade-off, I'm not sure, but we do get more business from people who understand that by doing the right things, they would want to support us. So likewise, we recently launched, as part of our sustainability commitment, a My Impact credit card. Now, My Impact credit card is not just an Islamic credit card, but it's also conventional, and it's the first credit card of its type that does not have compounding interest. We made a conscious decision that we are not going to charge compounding interest in this new credit card. Never heard before. Possibly my next year bonus will be lower, but in the longer term, we have gotten more customers just in the last 1 year on this. So it's a longer term play. There would be trade-offs, but look at it from a longer term perspective.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sharil. Okay, the second question maybe I'll address to Gretchen. How do you scale sustainable ideas across large companies like you within the short time frame that we have?
Yeah, I think it is helpful, for companies to know all of their risks and issues. So if you know your climate space and what you need to do there, look, this is the climate transition especially for large companies with significant footprints. This is the hardest transition that we've ever gone through. It's going to require a lot of technology shift of everything. But if you understand the beginning, what you need to do for climate, then as you're coming up with solutions, and you know what your nature impacts are also, companies will save more money in the long term and get through this transition better, quicker, and cheaper if you can do the climate action and the nature action, any of those other actions together, and pull it all into this sustainability agenda and roadmap, and try to redo your processes, redo your business with all of the sustainability aspects in mind. That will help build a stronger, better business for the long term if you know all of those aspects and pull it into the redesign, the change, and the adjustments that you're making towards climate.
Okay. Thank you, Gretchen. Okay, the third question, there are many, I'm just directing to a suitable panel member. This one maybe I'll direct into Ms. Renuka. Nature positive requires an objective that a commitment intends to meet, whether it's for biodiversity or water or related to emissions. Have these objectives been clarified internally, and how are you linking these to your implementation programs?
Thanks, Atish. Yes, so very definitely internally we share our Brew a Better World strategy with all our employees. So it's very clear. We set out not just the targets that we need to achieve. So for water, for instance, as a global company, the target is to be fully water balanced by 2030. And in fact, in Malaysia, we're 10 years ahead of the target. So we keep sharing with employees the good work done by the guys on the ground, the day-to-day initiatives that they take to help save water. In fact, the company has done a lot to change the mindset of employees, encouraging them to detect leaks, encouraging them to take small positive actions to reduce water consumption. Yeah. So likewise with carbon, we've shared our global targets and what are the first steps we as a company are taking, the progress we've made in phase 1, phase 2, as well as the work that needs to be done in phase 3. We're already engaged with 40 of our top suppliers on bringing them along with us on the journey to net zero. And as I mentioned earlier, also in terms of circularity, the objective is to be 100% zero waste to landfill, which we've achieved since 2017. So these targets are regularly shared with employees as well as reported externally in our annual report.
Okay, thanks, Ms. Renuka. I think there is one more question. Maybe this one I will leave it to panel member to just quickly give your thoughts. Any tips on how to enhance and maximize cross-functional or BU collaboration, commitment, and innovation of sustainability initiatives? Maybe you'll start with Mr. Sharil.
Firstly, any sustainability agenda, particularly something as complex as nature positive, needs to be within the corporate strategy. Because otherwise it'll just be something philosophical high up there. So when I was appointed as Maybank's first Chief Sustainability Officer in March 2021, 3 years and a bit ago, the next month, in April 2021, the small team and I came up with our sustainability commitments. We went to the group board and requested for the board to approve the sustainability commitments as KPIs to be embedded within the group president of Maybank and the EXCO members. Trust me, once it's in the KPI, it will be within the direct reports KPI because it will impact their pockets, right? And that was, I think, on hindsight, even though it's just 3 years ago, one of the best things that we did to have that within that collaboration within the organization. Because from there, then we talk about going out, because that will create that systemic change that I was telling you about, because then even our business people, our risk people will relook at how they're doing things. How do we, going back to what I said, infusing ESG considerations to credit, because now when you come to Maybank asking for a loan, it's not just based on your credit worthiness. We also came up with the first carbon calculator on loans, for example. Anybody who comes to Maybank with a request for funding, we are able to calculate emissions attributable to that loan request. So you have a thought about that, you see, so and I think that is required. So in terms of how do we create that cross-sector collaboration, internally first, get that strong, and then make sure you play a role within the industry that you are. So like Maybank, we are present in the Joint Committee on Climate Change. Maybank chairs the ABM ESG Committee. We were also recently elected into the 14-member Net Zero Banking Alliance steering group out of London. So start internally and then play your role within the industry.
Thank you, Mr. Sharil. Maybe quick thoughts from Gretchen?
Right, Chair. I completely agree with you. To take serious action, you need to have management on board. I'm really happy that in PCG, our board members are very supportive. Our CEO, our management committee, all on board, and our Patronus corporate group is also well on board and supportive to make change. But it just doesn't happen there. You really need a lot of internal engagement, and this is multifunctional. Sustainability crosses many aspects, and so you need to break it down into pieces. net zero, the nature group, the reporting, the water group, et cetera. I try to split it down into digestible pieces and then bring all the functions together to work on the specific problems while pulling them together then to look at the cohesive whole across all of the sustainability aspects. The other thing I think is just very important and has helped me across all the many years I've been working in sustainability is external engagement. Find friends out there, find other companies in the same industry and other industries, and figure out how do you do this together. None of us has all the answers to these really sticky, difficult, challenging problems, right? But how do we pull everybody together, get that information external, and then make sure you're educating, engaging internally so that people are excited, they know what to do, and perhaps make it a little bit competitive.
Okay, Ms. Renuka?
Can you hear me now? Okay. All right, I'm going to go back to my last slide. So when I talked about building blocks, this is what's essential to embed it within the organization, the tone from the top. I also spoke about the cross-functional governance team that we have, where leaders from different sections of the management will take accountability, whether it's for safety, water, social sustainability, employee well-being. Yeah. And then as we move out of the organization, I think what's really important is building the credibility of the organization, because no one will follow you until you get your back of house in order. Yeah. So for us, a lot of time was spent ensuring that our operations meet international standards before we go out and engage the public and ask them to come on board and join us in the journey. So when I spoke about the effort with the local communities, it took us about 1.5 years to win their trust. So it takes a lot of time and perseverance to show people that you're there for the long haul, a lot of patience on your part to go that journey. And ultimately, as YBhg mentioned today, it's got to be a whole of community approach. So we work not just with NGO, local communities, but various government agencies. Each and every one of us has got to play our role to make it for a better future for Malaysia. We as a company not only look at what we can do to influence others around us, but what can we do to guide other companies on this journey. So very happy if anyone wants to reach out together with GEC, we're happy to share best practices. How do you move along the route? And we're also working with MICCI, International Chamber, trying to get other companies on board on the ESG and net zero carbon journey. Another important aspect of the public engagement, the media plays a very important role, and I see the Star Media Group here today. They have showcased a lot of best practices as well as sharing initiatives carried out by companies. I think that's essential to inspire others on their journey as well. So yeah, to sum up, it's a holistic approach, working very closely with community, being mindful of the various stakeholders who are out there who can help us on the journey.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Renuka. I think time is up. Okay, so thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for joining today, and I would like to request a big round of applause to our panel members, okay, for informative, and we believe this will inspire more action. So maybe you can reach to us or other panel members after this if you want to, replicate the initiative in your place. With that, together we achieve more and faster. Thank you. God bless.
There we go. Thank you, Satis, and our very diverse lineup of panelists. Now, ladies and gentlemen, to those of you who are also viewing this virtually, I implore more corporations out there in its own respective industries, of course, to look at these companies, Petronas, Maybank, and Heineken, for the exemplary practices implemented in regard to ESG and sustainability. Well done. There we go. All right, wonderful. Let's give them another big hand, please. There we go. Thank you for leading this session, Satis. Well done. All right, let's now continue on. We have a message from the President and CEO of Acen Corporation. Please lend me your full attention to the screen in front of you, as this is a pre-recorded message by Eric Francia.
Good day to everyone. I'm delighted to share our insights and initiatives on the coal to clean energy transition. Let me begin with a brief introduction and background on Acen Corporation. Acen is the listed renewable energy platform of Ayala, which is one of the largest and most diversified business groups in the Philippines. Ayala is also the longest standing business house, as it celebrates its 190th anniversary this year. Acen, on the other hand, is the youngest core business of Ayala, having been established from a standing start in 2011. Today, Acen has close to 7 gigawatts of renewable capacity in operations, under construction, and signed agreements or won tenders. The Philippines is our core and largest market, accounting for around 40% of our capacity. We also have significant presence in Australia, Vietnam, and India, and a modest presence in Indonesia and other markets. The company is focused on solar and wind energy and is in the process of scaling up energy storage across the portfolio. While the company had always aspired to be renewables focused, as we are today, it did not start that way. We began our journey in 2011 in the Philippines from 0 megawatts, and our very first investment was a modest 50% equity stake in a 33 megawatt wind farm in northern Philippines. But we then quickly realized that renewables at the time would not scale up because it was very expensive and intermittent, i.e. unreliable. And what the country needed at the time was to support its growth was reliable and affordable power. And that could only be addressed by building baseload coal plants. So then our first 5 years was focused on building such capacity. And the good news is that the company was able to scale up beyond 1,000 megawatts of capacity and making a meaningful difference to the country. The not so good news, however, was that 93% of the capacity came from coal and only 7% from renewables. However, in 2016, 2017, we felt the groundswell on sustainable energy. Renewables was becoming more competitive and scalable, and the orientation on ESG was becoming more mainstream. We then took a strategic decision and a critical pivot from thermal to renewable sometime in 2017, where we redefined our market and decided that we do not have to be the largest power company in the Philippines, but we would like to aspire to become one of the largest renewable platforms in the region. And so the transformation journey began by divesting our coal assets and reinvesting the proceeds into our aggressive renewables expansion in the Philippines and beyond the region. And as a result, we had grown our renewable portfolio from 70 megawatts in 2016 to around 5,000 megawatts of capacity today, with a line of sight to reaching 7,000 megawatts imminently. Acen aspires to reach 20 gigawatts of renewables capacity by 2030 and net zero GHG emissions by 2050. Apart from scaling up renewables, Acen is also pioneering initiatives in early coal retirement. The company successfully implemented the world's first market-based energy transition mechanism, which reached financial close in November of 2022. The transaction involved the divestment and commitment to the early retirement of the 246 megawatt South Luzon Thermal Energy Corporation, or SLTech, coal plant, and its transition to cleaner technology by 2040 when the coal plant completes 25 years of operations. As the operating life of coal plants typically reach up to 50 years, the groundbreaking ETM initiative potentially reduces up to 50 million tons of carbon emissions. The ETM was supported by debt from Philippine banks, namely Bank of the Philippine Islands and Rizal Commercial Banking Corporation, and equity investments from insurance companies such as the Government Service Insurance System, GSIS, and Insular Life, among other investors. And while the 2040 coal retirement plan is laudable, Acen recognizes the position of International Energy Agency, or IEA, that is, if we are to attain the 1.5 degrees limit, the world would need to reduce coal emissions by 55% between 2022 and 2030. This would certainly be challenging for Southeast Asia, which collectively has the fourth largest coal plant installation globally and a strong growing demand for electricity, and have among the youngest coal plant fleet with an average age of under 15 years. With that said, this should not be a reason for Southeast Asian companies to do nothing. And to this end, Acen gave itself the option or the right to reacquire the SLTech coal plant as early as 2030 in the event that the right mechanism to incentivize an accelerated coal plant retirement emerges. Such mechanism is taking shape in the form of transition credits. Transition credits are high-integrity carbon credits that are granted to projects that enable the early retirement of coal plants and their replacement with clean energy while ensuring a just transition. We're quite fortunate that both the Monetary Authority of Singapore, or MAS, and the Rockefeller Foundation's Coal to Clean Credit Initiative, or 3CI, are both promoting the creation and scaling of transition credits in Asia and around the world. During COP28 last December in Dubai, Acen, 3CI, and MAS announced an exciting collaboration to implement the world's first coal to clean credit pilot project. The initiative will help road test the new methodology being developed by 3CI and hopefully jumpstart the market for transition credits. MAS, meanwhile, also signed a second pilot project with the Asian Development Bank involving a coal plant in Mindanao in southern Philippines. Acen's pilot project seeks to increase its ambition by accelerating the transition of SLTech coal plant to cleaner energy by 2030, 10 years earlier than what is already an aggressive retirement schedule. We are targeting both compliance and voluntary market participants, including sovereign and corporate buyers, to purchase these high-quality, high-integrity carbon credits. Proceeds from the transition credits will help fund the just transition for the coal plant, which will ensure that, number one, all stakeholders are kept whole and taken care of, the communities, the workers, the lenders, shareholders, customers. Number two, that a responsible decommissioning is undertaken. And number three, that a successful repurposing of the asset, taking into consideration all key stakeholders, happen. These transition credits will also provide financial support for the clean energy replacement to make sure that this is reliable and affordable. The plan is to replace the 246 megawatt coal baseload capacity that produces around 1.8 billion kilowatt hours of annual capacity with a 400 megawatt mid-merit IRES plant, which means an integrated renewables and energy storage system. This mid-merit IRES plant entails around $1.5 billion of investment and is envisioned to be configured as a 1,400 megawatt peak capacity of a solar plant integrated with a 1,600 megawatt hour battery energy storage system. This replacement capacity will ensure that, number one, that the foregone coal plant output is matched 100%. Number two, that the impact on the grid is negligible, given that the renewables intermittency is mitigated by the energy storage system. And number three, that the output is reliable and dispatchable. In summary, we are truly excited about the progress on transition credits. We are very grateful for the leadership of MAS and the Rockefeller Foundation. And we will also welcome the possibility of working with our potential partners, namely Gen Zero and Keppel Infrastructure, with whom we signed an MOU last month on a potential joint collaboration at the project level. This transition credit initiative is being undertaken with the highest level of standards and integrity. It is envisioned to be implemented under Article 6 with corresponding adjustments, and that the initiative has meaningful scale and real impact. The timeline is imminent, and the progress and momentum is strong. And perhaps equally, if not most importantly, the initiative is envisioned to be a catalyst for other future similar initiatives. We believe that this program is scalable and that we're going through a critical first step of a journey that is critically important. And yes, it is very challenging, but worth all our collective efforts to ensure success. We very much look forward to this continuing journey together. Thank you all very much.
There we go. Thank you, Eric. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's move forward to our next keynote. Our next keynote will be presented by one of the many heroes from our country's defense force. The title is for Anticipating Indirect Physical and Transition Risks. I'm sure you're all eager to know who this hero is. He has received various awards from governments and organizations such as Excellent Service Award and multiple medals of service. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Lieutenant Colonel Muhammad Shukri bin Matnor, Chief of Secretariat and Policy Planning and Coordination Division at the Malaysian Civil Defence Force.
Following the slides. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. By the way, I'm from a different world. I'm from the disaster management world. I'm shocked why I'm here, actually. So, all right, just to share to you the brief about the Malaysia situations right now, the crisis, especially on the climate change that affect us so very much. And thank you for the introduction, MC. Let me start our discussion today by bringing up to you the equation of disaster risk reduction, where you can see that the disaster risk reduction consists of the hazards, exposure, and also vulnerability divided by the coping capacity. Yeah, to show that in our disaster management world, we don't say that everything is disaster. See, we can say that natural hazards come by itself, whether from the natural or from the man-made kind of hazards. And you can see in terms of the exposure to the our world, or especially in Malaysia, it depends on the magnitude, the capacity, the frequency, and we didn't say that disaster happened in the jungle, where there's no people living, there's no wildlife, there's no anything, you see? But we say disaster when it happens, it totally affect on our livelihoods, our living, our daily lives. All right. So next, when we say about vulnerability, it is about our development. How different disaster when it affects, or natural hazard when it impact on the urban area, or differs with the rural area. That's kind of, how to say, is quite different. And then how it affect on the rich and the poor people. And suddenly on the business matters, and among the farmers, other than other categories. Okay, and then on the final notes, we can see that it is also depending on our coping capacity, how we can cope with the natural disasters. So in summary, natural hazards come in an unexpected way, but it is how our threats to the natural hazards that bring us up and how we can bring back, build back better in the future. Yeah, I believe you know that our risk right now is here. And last year, based on the IPCC, the current condition is 1.1 degrees Celsius of temperature change. And we believe that our target is 1.5 degrees before 2025. Yet, we can demarcate, because disasters in our world, we are demarcated into climate-related hazards. We have the tectonical hazards, geological hazards, and also environmental degradations, biological hazards. But now I'm trying to focus on the climate risks. So in Malaysia, we can see that it is predicted that in 2050, our temperature will be changed by 1.5 degrees Celsius. And what happened during that, we can see the way 30 years before, there's a lot of, temperature changes since 1901 until 2020, all right? So there's slight changes and a difference. And most of our world in Malaysia have been affected by floods, landslides, and also mass movement, and also thunderstorms. And climate scientists predicted that during 2020 until 2029, there's a lot of anomaly of rains. Now we feel that in normal way, we can say that most of our floods attack, especially at the northeast monsoon, during October or until February, right? So, but now the condition has changed. Okay? Even this year, we feel the El Nino attack, right? El Nino attack. So, you can see the accumulated rain, which should be downpour, during the whole year, will be accumulated within 4 months. So, I'm not sure whether we are expecting more rains within this October, November, December, until January. So there will be huge floods will be coming on. In total, Malaysia had affected with 629 climate-related disasters. And in total, there are 945,000 people evacuated from the area. All right? So it is expected in 2030, another 6 years, a quarter of Malaysian population will be evacuated because of climate hazard. This is only prediction, but you can see this is our risk here. On the top right is the flood vulnerability index, where on the next to it is the landslide hazards, and then below it is the sea level rise risk of Malaysia. We also facing, predicted to be faced with droughts in several areas, especially in Terengganu, Johor, and also Kedah. All right, so becoming from another world, I'm come here that my intention is to bridge our world together, disaster risk management with the climate action. Because you can see in the global way, it has been demarcated between climate change and also disaster risk reduction. So even in our Malaysia governments, there are two different sets of governance between disaster risk reduction and also climate change. Right? So to be clear, what I'm sharing is, people always think that disaster happens and then we try to, respond to it, right? But our actions need to be before or beyond that. Because in our disaster management world, we have 5 cycles, starting with the preparedness, and then continue with the mitigations, and then suddenly coming with the disaster. And then during disaster, then we do the response phase, and finally on the recovery phase. Just to be clear, most of us like to respond during the response phase. Why? It is popular because we can say that I already saved 100 millions of populations. I save a lot of money, but not a lot of people say that I'm going to have a good mitigation projects for 1.3 billions that serve, that protect the Malaysian population because of a levy to protect from floods, right? So this is why we need to have a good collaboration by getting involved by multiple actors, government actors, private sectors, NGOs, academia, community levels, to have a good bridge on knowledge between DRR and also climate change, and have a common set of governance in our world, and to have a good cross collaboration by bringing up the public participation into these multiple sectors. All right, just to promote to you, we believe, most of our belief that in the disaster or climate change, it is the government kind of work, right? So, but it's actually, let me bring you the way how the 1997 Kobe earthquake happens. Okay, in total, you can see during the Kobe earthquake, most of the response coming from the public itself, not from the government, because 30% of the government officers are trying to save people under the debris, right? So you can imagine Kobe earthquake happens in a glance at 1:15 a.m. in the morning, okay, during winter. So it is quite hard for a government responders to save everybody during the earthquake response. So what happens? People are coming in, giving aids with their knowledge, even a simple, method of using a car jack to jack the debris, okay? They can save people. Even they are using some sort like newspaper, becoming a cup for eating purposes. They're also using newspaper to build up portable toilets, okay? Because there's no water, there's no electricity, there are a lot of fires during that. So this is how we're trying to promote everybody to be in here, in the disaster management and also on the climate risk. So I believe we can have a good collaborations, especially from the privates. You might think that, I can only give money, I can give only, supports to the government. But in fact, we can have a very good disaster risk reduction and mitigation. We have a good PPAP, public-private partnership with the NGOs, with the government, to build up very good mitigation for the climate change, innovation, share the innovation and technology expertise, financial resources, and also coming with the emergency response. Yes, of course, not everybody are having the, advantage of wearing a uniform to be in the terms of disaster. But you can be heroes. You can be heroes during the peacetime, where you can educate the public, we can have a share of expertise and give them awareness. All right? This is also the roles of NGOs. A very good share of from my colleagues there. The NGOs become the bridge between the community and also the government. Because we, government officers, when you go to the ground, people think that, oh, you are government, right? There are some perceptions, negative perceptions from the government, especially during the Sri Muda, right? So whenever the NGOs coming on, so they're becoming like a friendly, in a friendly matter, they have built trust beforehand. They give assistance, mainly provide the help, and also hygiene kits, wash kits, and so on. And they are like a peace treaty among the government and also with the community itself. All right, this is for research. I believe there's no much researcher in here. But to be clear, in the disaster management world, whenever we do some symposium or conference, most of them coming from the government actors. Okay, but I'm shocked that the climate change, a lot of you coming from the private sectors. So this is why I believe that we need to merge this kind of fields, disaster risk reduction with the climate change, so that we can have a good participation from everybody. We could be heroes someday. On the final notes, can say that there is no such natural disasters actually in our term of disaster management. It is only natural hazards. All right? It is us that need the power to advocate, to give the knowledge to the people surrounding to us. All right? And we are the person who making choices whether we are going to be safe or not in the future. And finally, you may find my, I'm doing now a bit research on the climate change and also on the disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation governance concept in Malaysia. Perhaps we can have a very good jive among these two concepts. And you may find my lots of publications. You can Google my name, Mohamed Shukri Matno. There's a lot of publications for the DRI and also CCA. And hopefully, I also promotes, if you want to contribute to my research, please do contact me through the emails and also phone numbers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lieutenant. There we go. Now here we have a male role model of our nation's hero. I'm going to move on with our next heroine, a female role model. Ladies and gentlemen, we now move on to our next keynote. The speaker for this keynote is the first Muslim woman to complete the polar hat trick, crossing the South Pole, North Pole, and Greenland, three of which I have never been before, and she crossed all three. And has also led the all-women expedition to Antarctica and sailed with Sir Robert Swan on the Climate Force 2041 mission. Talk about girl power. She is the chairperson of All Women Empowerment to Accelerate, better known as AWETA. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a warm welcome to our National Polar Explorer, Dr. Sharifah Mazlina Syed Abdul Qadir.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And a very good afternoon to everybody. Right, no need to introduce about me anymore. You can see from there. Right. Just to share, I'm also different, yeah, Doc. I'm also different because I'm not a scientist, but I'm a polar explorer. So what I'm going to do today is to share with you my true experience witnessing the climate change that have been happening in Antarctica, in Arctic, and also in Greenland. So in total, I've done 6 expeditions. The latest one was last 2 years, 2002, when I went sailing to Antarctica with Sir Robert Swan for a purpose on Climate Force Mission 2041. So I will share with you some of the pictures as the evidence. All right. For example, this picture is taken in 2004 when I was at the South Pole. You know, Antarctica is so big, as maybe for your information, Antarctica is twice of Australia. The size is double the size of Australia. The thickness of the ice in 2004 when I went in is about 2.4 kilometers below. And the recent one, when I went to Antarctica in 2022, the ice has become thinner. It's only 1.6 kilometers. That means within that 21 years, the ice has been melted about 800 meters. You just imagine 800 meters thickness times double the size of Australia. Now you can see why we have a lot of floods all over the world. All right, in summertime, during that time, the temperature was minus 30 average at the base camp. Base camp is about 400 kilometers from the peninsula of Antarctica into Antarctica. That base camp is, to me, considered quite cold during that time. Minus 30 Celsius is average. But only recently when I went, it's only minus 10 to minus 14. You see the differences. It's getting warmer and warmer. And summer in South Pole, normally in 2004, maximum can go up to minus 68 Celsius, which I experienced the coldest about minus 50 at South Pole itself. And you know that in South Pole, the Kata Batik wind comes in right from there and it go out to the peninsula. So definitely South Pole will be the coldest area in Antarctica. And by year 2022, the temperature goes down to only minus 55. That is not good. It's getting warmer. And winter time is, for your information, the Antarctica, they have bright sunlight for 6 months non-stop. 6 months daylight, 6 months night time. So during that 6 month daylight, night time, the temperature should go, during that time is minus 128 Celsius. But now, recently, it's only minus 89 Celsius during night time. So that is not a good thing to know. And volcanoes, this is the latest one. I just read yesterday, actually, they have discovered 138 volcanoes in Antarctica. And 3 has been activated. 1 already distributed gold dust at Mount Erebus. So anybody who wants to collect gold dust, you can go to Erebus Mount in Antarctica. All right. So this is the US Research Center in Antarctica, 2004. Well, they built this research center and it's getting bigger and bigger. And they come up with a research, with an act called Act 5. So you can't plant anything, you can't extract anything. And of course, everybody knows that 2004, when I went there, I planted the first ever Malaysian time capsule, like 1 kilometer away from this base camp. And when they heard about me going again to Antarctica with my 3 portages in 2018, so I received a letter an email from them saying that, you know, Sharifah, I know what you have been doing, you're doing a lot of expedition, and you have your protege, and you plan to plant a new capsule for year 2035. So they said, I'm so sorry, you can't even extract the older one, and you can't even plant the new one. So that's so sad. Okay, that's fine. But then their research centers become bigger and bigger. It's growing so huge, and they have a lot of zone that they have strategized it. Oh, sorry. Which they said, this is a blue zone, this is a green zone, this is a black zone, this is quiet zone, this is ceremonial zone, so they have covered a lot of zone around there. It's okay then. So, just to show you how Antarctica look like. It's full of sastruges, full of wave, we call it frozen snow wave, and of course we have some plateau. But the situation is, this is getting even lesser because of climate change. All right? So, then in 2018, when I was in Antarctica, I met this guy, Sir Robert Swan. So he heard about me talking a lot of things, and especially, I'm also an NGO chairman. I understand what you are doing. We also do a lot of charity work. We also do all this during flood, create awareness and all that. When we met, we discussed, and finally he said, come, let's join me in my sailing to Antarctica on a Climate Force 2041. I was so excited because this is something new for me. All this while I've been crossing inside Antarctica and Arctic and all that. Now we are going to the peninsula of Antarctica. That's me, he pointing where we are supposed to go. So I went on sailing with him. From Argentina port of Ushuaia, we go straight to the peninsula of Antarctica. 3 days, 3 nights, and the worst part when I have to go through Drake of Passage where the ocean, the wave is about 16 meters high. So amazing. So that's us when we arrived at the peninsula of Antarctica. We came down, we were on the boat, a small speedboat, then we go straight to the Iceland, and then we hop on into few places. What so sad, I have a lot of stories to share, but this is not the place where I'm doing sharing of experience, so I just show you the most important part. That's the one of the volcano. It's already activated. You don't see any snow on it at all. It's quite big. We went to a few places around this volcano area, and at the end of the day, we did polar plunge at the shore because the water is so warm already in Antarctica. The temperature is supposed to be minus 20, minus 15, but here it's only minus 5. That's why we did polar plunge. That's crazy. All right, so you can see all this. All right, it's already activated. We can see the warm actually. Then on the way back to Argentina, you can see all the big iceberg has become smaller and smaller and smaller. This is after we passed through Drake Passage. On the way back to Argentina, you can see that these small pieces of iceberg. But you can see this is how big. I can show you the video a bit. That's how at the peninsula of Antarctica. It's so bad. You can see everything is, even the penguins, even the seal, they are suffering. All right. You can see millions of these iceberg floating around at that area. All right. I can give you a bit of that. You can see, and you can see a lot of rocks as well exposed. There is not so much of snow at that area, so everything has been fallen out to the open sea. That's very bad. Okay. So what happened is that last December, then I realized that, oh, last December, you know, the Antarctica from one side to the other side is about 14 million kilometers. And last December, one big hole of ozone about this, has already been exposed. The size is about 24 million kilometers. So double the size of Antarctica. So you can imagine what's going to happen. All right. Then what happened is that one of the biggest iceberg has been break out from Antarctica mainland and now floating out to the big ocean. So this is the latest video that I got. So I was actually sharing this information through TikTok, my account. So, and then I'm showing them this, and you just imagine 4,000 kilometers width, and the thickness is 400 meters. Floating out to the big ocean, and once it enter the Drake Passage, you can imagine what's going to happen, and expect more seawater level will rise everywhere in the world. So, then I heard about this. I have my alumni in the Robert Swan's group, and we have this information that, oh, somebody is talking about, let's protect Antarctica. This is the main mission that we go for this climate change, Climate Force 2041, to protect Antarctica, to create awareness so that don't let Antarctica melted. And we realized that one engineer that said that let's do this, curtain, ice curtain. The plan is to do like this. To make the ice curtain, ship out all this hot water from the El Nino so that it won't melt the Antarctica main ice land, so that it won't collapse. So then they are planning to do this. I have a lot of information on this, but then it's still under construction, and of course they need about 100 billion to do this. Okay, right. So it's still under the process. Then I went to North Pole. You see how bad North Pole 2007 is so thin that even the helicopter cannot land, and we have to jump for us to start doing our expedition. Look at the open water, tons of it. Most of the time I met this open water, and look at that. It's not as solid as Antarctica. It's break up everywhere. All right, open sea, anywhere. You can see that ice crack. These are the global warming that has already happened in North Pole, in Arctic, 2007. Pressure ridges, surprisingly, I never heard about it, but when I was there, I have to encounter a lot of pressure ridges. And then what happened is that whatever I've been doing have attracted attention from Arctic Association, also from the ambassador of Russia in Malaysia. So he invited me to go to St. Petersburg. So this is going to be my third year, this is December, to speak at the World Forum on Arctic today and the future. Why are they making this Arctic today and the future? Because Arctic is melting and soon it's not going to be there anymore. So we are talking about it and we do something about it as well. All right. So I created my own TikTok. Then I realized that, hey, I need to create this awareness to everybody, because I realized that the awareness among Malaysians are less than 10%. Do you believe me? Do you agree with that? All right. Of course, we do a lot of policy making. We discuss, we submit. Great. But public in general, they don't know anything. You ask them, I did a survey, I will go around, I ask them, do you know what climate change? They don't know. So I was thinking, like, what should I do now? Then the best way is to speak to public with my own, with public, to create awareness, Then I create my own TikTok. Then the first thing I showed them, this is my first slide on my TikTok, when I was talking to this Russian scientist at our Russian embassy in Ampang, when they invited me to speak during Geography Day, World Geography Day in the embassy, put on satellite, and I was speaking with the scientist. And cut it short, they agreed to what I'm doing, they endorse what I'm doing, and most importantly, they share me this slide saying that, look, Sharifah, by year 2050, if Antarctica melted 40% or 50% of it, then the seawater level will rise very high. And what will happen is that if there's a tsunami, then the height of the tide of the tsunami will be 58 meters, which is 3 times higher than the Aceh tsunami in 2004. So watch out, yeah. All right, so I went to Greenland then. I realized that, oh, we have night time that time. Okay, now I expect, oh, it's going to be that extreme cold. Yes, but then I was so surprised. Throughout the journey, I see a lot of rocks. Greenland is melted very badly as well. So this is so sad, and this is news, quite news, that Greenland is losing 30 million tons of ice an hour. This is a recent study. So guys, not only that, all the iceberg on the mountain, and even Everest is losing the iceberg. It's supposed to be melted. They're supposed to be in 2035. Everest supposed to have lost their iceberg about 35%, but it's already happened this year. That you can see what happened, right? You can see all the old crops, that all those dead people can be found easily nowadays. Okay, so that's so I can see all the tipping point from all the expedition. And again, Malaysia made an announcement that by year 2050, there's a lot of cities in Malaysia is going to be under the ocean. This is true. So what happened is that I really have to make a good awareness. So I created my serious TikTok with my logo, and I said, I was thinking that what should be the good name? Climate change? They said, cliche. Pemanasan global, they said, oh, we've learned in school 16 years ago. So I was thinking that the best thing is I put, okay, climate disaster. But I changed it to Malay, it's going to be Kiamat Iklim. You know what? On the first day I was online during my TikTok, 45,000 entered to become my follower. And within a short period of time, I have today already 318.2. Okay, please come and join me, so that I was talking about climate change, and I even give a solution, what to do. This is what they want to know. I was talking about climate change or climate disaster from the sky to the earth, even to the deep ocean. So I would love to have a collaboration with anybody who wants to collaborate with me, because my mission is to speak to the public and create awareness. They have to know what to do, they have to be prepared. We have to give them a lot of awareness and make them prepared to reduce the mental health issues. Mental health issues is also a big issue now. All right, so let's have to do that. And I have a message from Robert Swan. He knows that I'm going to speak to public and to few people, so he gave me this message.
Good doctor, this is Rob Swan. We met years ago. I was the first person in history to have walked to the North and South Poles, and you are with an incredible champion, our very own Sharifah, who's been to Antarctica with me twice, and she is such an amazing force in Malaysia. I believe it's so important that we inspire young people on the issue of climate change. You know that science has told us the situation that our world faces, and for some reason our response to that science is not very positive. And young people, a lot of them are feeling trapped, afraid, they have anxiety, and we need to break through that. I think also we need to think about our stakeholders, like small farmers in Malaysia. What are we doing to actually support them? I'm here in the rainforest in far north Queensland, actually not very far from you, northern tip of Australia. So my message is, let's work with Sharifah to get some really positive messages out to young people. But as you know, it's no good talking at young people. What we've got to do is to engage them. And what we need to do is to be able to say, look, what are your ideas on innovation? What are your ideas on engaging with the energy transition? Let's challenge young people to come up with solutions, and maybe they can even take some of those solutions forward and put them into the marketplace. Most importantly, Malaysia can lead on this issue in APAC. It's really important, and if you require my support, I'm 100% behind you and behind Sharifa to get the job done. This is Rob Swan. All the very best.
All right, so you have heard that, and that's what I've been doing now. I've been speaking a lot, doing a lot of engagement with public in general, all walks of life, most importantly to create awareness and also give them a solution. So anybody who interested to be with me, to collaborate with me, hop into my sledge and let's sail together. Agreed with that? Thank you so much. You can get my contact through the organization. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Doctor. That was a wonderful sharing there. Ladies and gentlemen, can we also give all of the panel speakers here today a big round of applause, please? There we go. Now, ladies and gentlemen, once again, I'd like your kind cooperation and assistance to please provide us with your feedback regarding the summit by filling out our online survey form. Please do not leave just yet. Okay, I have a few announcements to make. So just scan a QR code to get our online survey form. Now, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to take a few seconds, okay, just these few seconds to say a few words as I'll be signing off after this. We hope that you had a pleasant experience at this event, and what we really want is to ensure that we have created an impact through this event. You attending this event is one step. After this will be the action. What's next? All right. So I implore you to join hands and work together to make a change. I would also like to take this opportunity on behalf of Climate Governance Malaysia to extend our sincere appreciation and gratitude for being to everyone for being a part of our summit, especially to our esteemed thought leaders, the speakers, experts, and climate heroes, our valuable sponsors and partners, and also a shout out to the 12 higher learning institutions, the universities, the colleges that have been broadcasting our sessions online to students. Thank you, everyone. In addition to that, these higher learning institutions will also have satellite events, so more information is available on the WOVA app. And ladies and gentlemen, the masterclasses and workshops will start at 2 p.m. So sorry, we might be a bit late like yesterday, so just stay attentive to whatever announcements that may be made through the WOVA app. So I hope that you join your respective sessions later on based on the locations provided. We have our committee will be assisting you. You may refer to the WOVA app for this. And as you leave, please do not forget your personal belongings. I'll most probably be sweeping the entire auditorium, and if there is any missing items, I'll claim it as my own. All right, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Climate Governance Malaysia, once again, we would like to apologize if there are any shortcomings or inconveniences caused that or may have happened throughout the entire event. I wish you a fruitful masterclass and workshop, and now invite you for lunch. Have a pleasant afternoon ahead. I'm MC Jason, signing off. Thank you.